Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was so tired on the day I moved in that I didn't even notice the small door in the basement. I saw the stairs leading down, but I was more concerned with the clutter of boxes in the living room. I remember carrying them inside, one by one, with sweat dripping down my face. My new place smelled like dust and old plaster. It was quiet and still, and I didn't see any neighbors around. The real estate agent had mentioned something about the previous owner storing tools in the basement, but she never said anything about a locked compartment or strange drawings. By the time I went downstairs that first night, I felt a bit uneasy. The basement light was weak and the bulbs flickered in the corners. I saw a narrow door set into the back wall, secured by a rusty padlock. I tried to pull it open, but it didn't budge. It didn't even rattle. It was stuck in place as if it had been there for ages. I left it alone at first. I had other things to do. Unpack clothes, assemble furniture, figure out where I'd put my couch. But I couldn't stop thinking about that little door. I had never seen a compartment locked from the outside like that in a house. It reminded me of a storage closet, but the idea of something hidden inside felt strange. The next day, after I had some of my stuff sorted, I went back down with a flashlight in one hand and a small hammer in the other. The basement was chilly, and I smelled mold in the damp corners. I walked over to the door and tapped the padlock with my hammer. It made a dull clang. It was solid, not a cheap lock, and the metal was covered in reddish rust. I decided to force it open. I didn't have a proper bolt cutter, so I used the claw side of the hammer to pry the lock. It was stubborn. My hands trembled, partly from the tension of forcing the metal and partly from the uneasy feeling I had in my chest. I was alone down there, and the space felt cramped, even though the basement was fairly large. My heart pounded a little harder than usual. After a few minutes, the lock finally gave with a loud snap. I froze for a moment when it broke. I heard the sound echo in the basement. It was sharper and louder than I expected. Then I pulled the small door open. Inside, I found a cramped room. At first, I didn't see anything except a dangling light bulb and bare concrete walls. Then I noticed the scribbles. They were everywhere, covering every wall and even part of the ceiling. They looked like strange, disjointed shapes, all drawn in a deep red paint. I walked in and pointed my flashlight at the walls, shining the beam over the patterns. The lines were rough and uneven, as if someone had scrawled them in a rush. Some of them looked like repeated circles. Others were jagged lines or odd spirals. My chest felt tight when I realized there was no obvious pattern or sense in them. It seemed chaotic, but I couldn't shake the impression that someone had tried to write something. I reached out and touched the paint on the wall. It felt dry and chalky. There was no smell. I ran my finger over one of the lines and felt the raised texture. I looked around for a switch and found a small chain hanging from the light bulb. I gave it a tug. The light flickered on, revealing more scribbles than I'd realized. I felt my jaw tense. I had never seen anything like it. This was more than just random graffiti. It covered every inch of the room, from the floor up to the ceiling. I walked around, trying not to step on any broken debris, but there wasn't much on the floor, just a few loose nails and cobwebs. When I left the little room, I felt a weird tension in my shoulders. My neck was stiff and my head was pounding. Back upstairs, I tried to focus on unpacking more boxes, but I kept picturing those scribbles. That night, I went to bed feeling exhausted. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't shut out the image of those red lines. They seemed to move in my mind when I tried to sleep. I spent hours tossing in bed, staring at the ceiling. At some point, I heard a faint noise. It sounded like a whisper. I couldn't understand it, but it came from below, somewhere in the house. My skin prickled. I held my breath, trying to listen. The sound died out. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. The next morning, I went down to the basement again. I had a strange urge to check that small room. I can't explain it well, but it was like I wanted to see if the scribbles were still there, or if they somehow changed overnight. When I switched on the light, I froze. The scribbles weren't in the same places. I'm not talking about me forgetting their arrangement. I mean, they were genuinely different. Some of the spirals on the left wall seemed to have shifted toward the center. Other lines I remembered on the ceiling were suddenly grouped on the upper corner. I looked around, feeling sweat break out on my forehead. My breathing got faster. I told myself I had just remembered them wrong. Maybe I was half asleep yesterday, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like they had moved. My stomach twisted, and I left the basement. I spent the day trying to distract myself with chores. I hung some pictures. I organized my bedroom. I took a trip to the hardware store to pick up a few items for small repairs. But every so often, I'd catch myself staring at the basement door. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back down or stay away. The evening came and I found myself at the top of the basement stairs again, holding a better flashlight. I kept thinking that if I looked carefully, I would find an explanation. Maybe there was a draft of air or some trick of the light. So I made my way down, step by step. It was colder than before. When I reached the small room, I felt the hair on my arm stand up. The space seemed even narrower. I turned on the light and swept my flashlight beam over the walls. The scribbles had changed positions again. This time I noticed a cluster of curved lines near the ceiling that formed a shape like a half circle. My hands trembled. I felt a jolt in my chest, and my breath caught. Something was wrong. I backed out of the room. The door creaked and I spun around, shining the flashlight behind me. The basement was empty, but I had the sensation that something was in there with me, maybe behind the old furnace or in the corner by the stack of boxes. I felt my throat go dry. I hurried upstairs and slammed the basement door shut. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard a whisper again, the same low hiss like someone trying to form words under their breath. I sat up in bed, listening. It came in little bursts, followed by silence. My heart pounded. My thoughts were scattered. I began to question if I was imagining things. I was alone in a new house. I was stressed. Maybe it was all in my head. But the more I tried to reason it away, the louder the whispers seemed to get. Eventually, I got up, walked around the living room, and stared out the window at the quiet street. My reflection looked pale under the streetlight glow. I felt the urge to check the basement again, but I didn't. I didn't want to see those red lines shifting around. I wanted to pretend that the door was locked again. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy. I went to work, came home, ate simple meals, and avoided the basement. The house stayed quiet during the day, but every night the whispers returned. They were never loud enough for me to make out words, but I heard them. A faint hiss, or a murmuring that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. One evening I turned on every light in the house. I even put music on, hoping to chase away the eerie mood. It didn't help. When I shut the music off and headed to bed, I heard the faint voice again, coming up from below. My nights got worse. I started sweating in bed, waking up every hour with my heart pounding. My mouth was dry, and my muscles felt tight. I dreaded going down to the basement, yet part of me felt drawn to it. Around a week after I first opened that door, I decided I needed to face it again. I walked downstairs with my flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, although I didn't know what good the crowbar would do against some scribbles on a wall. The basement was still as cold as before. My breath felt short. I stepped inside the little room and flicked on the light. I searched the walls for any hint that the paint had shifted again. This time the scribbles almost formed shapes that resembled letters. Not normal letters, but some arrangement of lines that seemed intentional. I stood there with the flashlight aimed at the largest cluster of markings. My pulse thudded in my ears. My stomach churned. The lines looked like they were trying to form a message, but I couldn't read it. I didn't understand what I was seeing. My head started to ache. Then I heard a soft creak behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight at the doorway. No one was there. I felt my legs tense up, ready to run. I forced myself to stay still and look around the cramped room again. I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting from one set of scribbles to another. They felt alive, like they were shifting in front of me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands were sweating so much I almost dropped the flashlight. I backed out of the room without turning around. I turned off the light, slammed the door, and ran up the stairs. My heart was pounding as I collapsed on the couch in the living room. I tried to calm down, but my pulse stayed high. I sat there in the dark, panting and wiping sweat off my forehead. The house felt wrong, like it was pressing in on me. I thought about leaving. Maybe I could stay in a motel for a few nights. I even grabbed my phone and checked hotel prices, but I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the front door, too tired to think straight. I didn't go to work the next day. I woke up with a splitting headache and called in sick. My voice sounded shaky when I left the message for my boss. I spent the morning pacing around the house. My hands were restless, picking at my shirt, tapping on walls, flipping through old receipts. I needed to do something about that little room. It was making me feel insane. The whispers at night were getting louder. I couldn't understand them, but they sounded urgent. My shoulders were sore from tension, and I had a cramp in my neck that wouldn't go away. I was drinking too much coffee to stay awake because I dreaded going to bed. In the early afternoon, I went down to the basement again. My knees felt weak and my stomach fluttered. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, shining my flashlight around the open area. Everything looked normal. It was just an empty basement with my boxes piled against the far wall. The small door was closed. The padlock was broken and hung loosely from the latch. I hesitated, then reached for the handle and slowly pulled the door open. The smell of dusty air rushed out. I stepped inside and flipped the light on. The scribbles were arranged in rows now. They looked like lines stacked on top of each other, forming blocks. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. My chest felt tight. I ran the beam of the flashlight over every surface, hoping to find some clue that this was just a prank or a weird remodeling job. But it looked more like the scribbles were taking shape in front of me. My eyes were burning from lack of sleep and my head was spinning. I stood in front of one block of scribbles, squinting at it. My hands started shaking, and I felt cold sweat rolling down my back. The lines almost looked like a face, but not quite. My heart beat so fast I thought I might pass out. I heard something move behind me, a faint shuffle of footsteps on concrete. My hair stood on end. I turned around, shining the flashlight wildly, but no one was there. I swallowed hard, trying to catch my breath. I spoke out loud, just a single word. "Hello?" My voice echoed in the small space. Nothing answered, but I felt a strong pull to stay there. My ears buzzed with the sound of my own pulse. My mind raced with possibilities. Was I losing it? Was the paint really shifting, or was I seeing things? I touched a scribble near the corner, pressing my hand against it. The red paint felt dry and cracked under my fingertips, just like before. I left my palm there for a moment, listening to my heartbeat. Then, I heard the whisper again, right next to my ear. A soft, breathy hiss. I yanked my hand away and stumbled out of the room. My foot caught on the edge of the doorway, and I nearly fell into the basement. I gasped and clutched at my chest, my heart pounding like a drum. I climbed the basement stairs, my legs shaking with every step. I locked the door at the top of the stairs, even though it was just a flimsy interior door. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, trying to calm my breathing. My face felt hot, and my clothes were damp with sweat. I felt this intense urge to get out of the house, but I also felt anchored in place, like I was too worn out to move. I stayed there on the kitchen floor for a long time, staring at the locked basement door. I listened for any sound from below, but all I heard was silence. I hardly slept that night. I lay in bed with the lights on, drifting in and out of uneasy dozing. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the red scribbles forming words and shifting around. My limbs felt heavy. My head throbbed. I wondered if I should call someone for help. But who would I call? The police? A friend? I didn't have many friends around, and I sure wasn't going to tell someone I thought a room in my basement was alive. They'd think I was out of my mind, so I just endured it. Days passed in a blur. I started avoiding the basement altogether. I taped the basement door shut and left the light on in the hallway. The whispers still came at night, but sometimes they were quieter. just faint enough that I could ignore them if I kept the TV volume high. My appetite suffered. My hands shook when I tried to do simple tasks. I could barely focus at work, and I found myself snapping at people for no reason. I felt like I had a constant knot in my stomach. Whenever I thought about that small room, my heart would skip a beat and my mouth would go dry. I still don't know if that room is actually alive or if my imagination is playing tricks on me. All I know is that the red scribbles aren't normal, and the whispers feel real when they slip into my ears at night. I haven't gone back down there in a week. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room with every light on, staring at the basement door. My palms are sweating, and my heart is racing. I know that little compartment is still there, and I know the scribbles are probably shifting again, forming something that wants to be read. I can't bear to see what shape they'll take next. I can't sleep. I can't relax. I just keep hearing that faint voice, drifting up through the cracks in the floor. I don't know how this ends. I'm too tired to think straight, and I feel like the walls are closing in on me. I don't have evidence to show anyone. I only have these nights full of whispers and the memory of those shifting scribbles. Maybe I'll try to seal the door shut with nails and boards. Maybe I'll just pack my stuff and leave this house behind. But something tells me that room won't let me go so easily. Every time I think about leaving, I feel a strange pull, like my feet are stuck in place. Right now, I'm sitting here, and it's dead quiet. I'm waiting for the next whisper, waiting to feel that prickle on the back of my neck. I hate how this house feels. I hate that I feel watched even when I'm alone. But I can't tear my eyes away from that basement door. It's like the house is waiting for me to come back downstairs to see what the scribbles have turned into. And I can't stop thinking about it even though every muscle in my body tells me to run. I never planned to return to this town. I spent a decade trying to forget the old streets and the gray sky. But a friend told me about an apartment for rent, and I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. Something about this building keeps me on edge. Every night I feel a tightness in my chest. My legs get stiff. My hands sweat. I keep waiting for something to jump out at me. I'm not talking about loud neighbors or creaking floors. I'm talking about the windows. They have this thick fogged glass. Even in the daytime, the light outside looks dull through them. At night, though, they become different. They seem to breathe or shift. It's not my imagination. I wish it were. I walk up the front steps of this building on my first day and notice the chipped paint on the railing. It flakes off under my palm. My key is cold and a little bent, but it fits the lock. The hallway smells like old carpet and cleaning products. There are dark stains on the walls near the baseboard. I can't tell if it's water damage or something else. I pass one door after another. Some have numbers barely hanging on by a nail. Others have no numbers at all. My door is 2C. The metal digits are crooked. The C is scratched. I push open the door and it sticks for a second before it swings in. Inside, the apartment is smaller than I remember from the photos. There's a living room that connects to a tiny kitchen. There's a short hallway that leads to the bedroom and a bathroom. The walls are a pale yellow. There are a few holes where someone tried to hang pictures. One corner has a crack that stretches from the ceiling to halfway down the wall. The light fixtures are old and flicker a bit when I turn them on. Then I notice the windows. They're bigger than I expected, each one filled with that frosted, milky glass. I can see the faint outline of the street outside, but it's distorted, like I'm looking through a layer of steam. It makes me uneasy. I close the blinds right away. My stomach feels off, but I tell myself it's just the musty smell and the stale air. That first night I try to settle in. I don't have much furniture. I set up my old TV on a crate in the living room. I toss a few clothes in the bedroom closet. I stock the fridge with water, bread, and some sandwich stuff. Around 8, I realize the heater in the living room isn't working. I check the thermostat, but it does nothing. My breath comes out in small puffs of steam. I grab a spare blanket and wrap it around my shoulders. I can't stop looking at the windows, though. With the blinds drawn, they look like pale rectangles in the walls, almost glowing. The glass is thick, but I can still see slight shapes passing on the other side when cars drive by or when the streetlights flicker. After a while, I turn off the TV. The silence makes my ears ring. I go to bed, but I can't sleep. My mind keeps wandering to those windows. Around midnight, I get up and walk through the hallway in the dark. I peek into the living room. My arms feel tense. My neck muscles are tight. I realize I'm holding my breath. I step closer to the window by the couch. I reach for the blinds, then pause. Part of me thinks I'm being ridiculous, but another part doesn't want to see what's behind them. My hand shakes a bit as I lift the edge of the blinds and look out. At first, I see nothing but that hazy view. Then I notice something like a shadow. It's on the glass, not outside, but inside the thickness of the window, shifting around like it's trapped. A quick jolt runs through my chest. My hand flies away from the blinds. I breathe hard. I stay still for a minute, trying to slow my heartbeat. Then when I look again, it's gone. The glass is empty. I tell myself it was a trick of the light. The next day, I head to work in a rush. I don't bother to make coffee or anything. I just grab my jacket and leave. Outside, the day feels damp. The sky is low. I glance back at the building. The windows stand out like giant vacant eyes. I feel this prickling at the back of my neck, so I turn away and walk faster. My whole workday, I can't concentrate. I type reports, I answer phones, but my mind drifts back to that shape I saw. By the time I get off, I feel a headache coming on. My temples throb. The last thing I want is to go home, but I have nowhere else to go. When I return that evening, I notice the hallway lights are out. Only one flickers at the far end near the stairs. I climb the steps in semi-darkness. My foot catches on a torn piece of carpet. I nearly trip. My door is locked, which is good, I guess, but it doesn't make me feel safer. Once inside, I switch on the main light. It fizzles for a second before coming on. The apartment is cold again. I flip the heater switch. Nothing happens. I want to call the landlord, but it's after hours, and I doubt he'd do anything right away. I fix a quick dinner, then sit in the living room with the TV on low. I catch a glimpse of movement in the window again. I don't want to look. My breathing quickens. My fingers dig into my legs. I finally force myself to walk over. I raise the blinds. The street outside is barely visible. The glass is blurry and dark. But I see a shape again, like a person's outline. It's not in the street. It's not on the sidewalk. It's inside the window's reflection, but it moves as if it's on the other side. I back up a few steps. My heart is pounding. Then I notice it fade away, like smoke dispersing. My arms feel weak. My skin feels cold. I don't know what to do, so I yank the blinds down and step away. Over the next few nights, I realize this isn't a one-time thing. Every evening, around the same time, that shape appears. It's always in the corner of my eye at first. When I look straight at it, it takes a second before it fully forms. It never stays long. It disappears if I get too close or if I look for too long. But it's there. I'm sure of it now. My pulse races each time. My throat feels dry. My hands shake. I keep telling myself it's a trick of the glass, a weird quirk of this old building. But then one night I see something else. When I lean in, I notice the shape starts to look like a man. It's dark and featureless, but it stands like a man with shoulders and a head. My stomach twists. I feel an urge to run. I can't, though. I stay glued in place, staring at it. I try to convince myself it's my own reflection, but I can see my own reflection too. Mine is weaker in the glass and the shape is separate. There's a gap between us. It shifts, sliding to one side like it's checking me out. I step back, and it steps forward in the reflection. My heart hammers. I almost choke on my own breath. Then it dissolves again like it's been pulled away. I rush to the bathroom and splash cold water on my face. My skin tingles. I stand there, leaning against the sink, not sure what to do next. I don't call the cops because what would I say? That my window is haunted? They'd probably tell me to get lost. The next morning, I call the landlord about the heat. He says he'll send someone by in a couple of days. I think about mentioning the window, but I keep my mouth shut. I don't need him to think I'm unstable. At work, I feel sluggish. My eyes are sore from lack of sleep. My back aches. I keep replaying the image of that shape in my head. I can't stop the thoughts. At one point, I look at the office window next to me. It's clear glass, and I don't see anything abnormal. But I still tense up. Even the reflection of my coworker behind me makes me jump. When I get home, I turn on every light in the apartment. I bring out a small lamp from the bedroom and put it in the living room. I also plug in a nightlight in the hallway. Around 8, I check the windows. I see nothing but the dull streetlights glow outside. I exhale, feeling a bit relieved. Then, around 9, I notice a flicker again. It's so faint I almost miss it. I sit on the couch, gripping my knees. My heartbeat is steady but fast. My head hurts. Slowly, I stand up and move closer to the window. The shadow is there again, a thin outline, almost pressed against the glass from the inside. My teeth clench. My face feels hot. It's like it's waiting. I speak out loud in a low voice. I say, "What do you want?" I don't expect an answer, and I don't get one. The shape doesn't move for a moment. Then it shifts and kind of raises a hand. There's no detail in that hand, no fingers I can make out, just a dark shape where a hand should be. It points at me, or it seems like it. My chest tightens. My breathing goes shallow. I feel the room spinning. I can't stand there anymore. I rush to the kitchen and open the fridge, pretending to look for food. I stare at the dull interior light of the fridge, trying to calm down. My legs feel shaky. After a minute, I close it and glance back at the window. The shape is gone. Over the next few days, the figure gets more distinct. I see the outline of a head with a slight dip where the neck is. The shoulders are broad, and the torso tapers down like a normal human. It doesn't have facial features, but I can sense it looking at me. Sometimes I think I catch a hint of movement that resembles breathing. The glass never clears, though. It stays foggy, and that shape stays locked in there. I start losing sleep. I can't focus on anything else. My eyes are always on the window. I get headaches that pulse behind my eyes. My mouth is dry all the time. I drink water constantly, but I never feel fully hydrated. One night I decide to try something different. I bring a folding chair from the bedroom and set it right in front of the window. I sit down with the lights dimmed, facing the glass. My legs tremble. I rest my hands on my lap. I see the reflection of the lamp behind me. For a few minutes, nothing happens. Then the shape appears again, sliding into view from the side. My heart rate jumps. I swallow hard. This time it holds its position. I stare at it. It stands as tall as me, maybe a little taller. I notice it tilt its head. I tilt my head too. It mirrors my movement, but a second later, I lift my hand slowly. It lifts its hand, out of sync with me, but definitely the same gesture. My mind races. I wonder if it's copying me or if it's trying to replace me. I get up and move close to the glass, just a few inches away. My breath fogs the surface a little. The shape doesn't back away. It stands right there, almost face to face with me through that thick layer. My chest feels tight. My palms sweat. I feel like I'm about to pass out. Suddenly, it leans forward, or that's how it appears. I jump back, stumbling over the folding chair. My back hits the floor. Pain shoots through my shoulder. I scramble to my feet, rubbing my arm. When I look at the window, the shape is gone. After that, I sleep in the bedroom with the door closed and a towel stuffed under it like I'm trying to block out a draft. I don't know if that helps, but I feel better not seeing the living room window. In the morning, I consider checking out and leaving. I don't have much money, though. The rent here is cheap. I don't have other options right now. I try to convince myself that I can handle it. Maybe I'm letting my imagination run wild. But the next evening, I see the figure again, even though I avoid looking at the windows. It appears in the hallway window at the far end, near the staircase. I freeze when I see it. Nobody else is around. I feel a buzzing in my ears. The shape is faint, but it's the same silhouette. I turn around and head back inside my apartment, slamming the door behind me. My breathing is out of control. My hands shake so bad I can't fit the key into the lock at first. I finally manage to lock it. Then I lean against the door, panting. I can't stand this. That night is the worst so far. I decide to open the window in the living room. It has a latch on the inside. I want to see if the outside is normal, if I can wipe away the fog. Maybe that will solve the problem. I open it and there's a burst of cold air. I lean out a little, craning my neck to see the glass from the outside. It's the same milky surface on both sides. It's thick, old glass. I can't wipe it clean. My arm is shaking. I feel a strong sense of dread, like the shape might yank me through the window. I close it quickly and lock it. I sit down on the couch, feeling exhausted. My eyes burn. I switch on a small lamp and stare at the blinds, determined not to open them. Then I hear a soft tapping on the glass. It's so light that I think I might be imagining it, but then it comes again. Tap, tap. My chest constricts. I move slowly to the window, not sure why I'm doing it. My bare feet are cold on the floor. I push the blinds aside. The figure is there, closer than ever. It taps again, but there's no actual movement on the outside. I just hear the tapping. My entire body tenses. Then it lifts its arm again, forming what looks like a hand on the glass. It holds it there like it wants me to place my hand on the other side. I back away. My mind is racing. I don't want to touch it. I have no idea what would happen if I do. My scalp tingles. My body feels hot. I rush to the bathroom and lock the door. I sit on the edge of the tub, breathing hard. My arms are cold to the touch. After a while, I decide to go to bed and try to shut it all out. I pack a small duffel bag just in case I want to run. I keep it next to the bed. I leave the light on in the hallway. At around 3 in the morning, I wake up because I feel something. It's like someone's in the apartment with me. My heart is pounding. I listen, but I hear nothing except the hum of the old fridge. I open the bedroom door. The living room light is off. I know I left it on. My mouth goes dry. My fingertips are cold. I force myself to reach for the switch. The lamp doesn't come on. Maybe the bulb burned out. I walk to the window. The blinds are halfway open. I'm sure I closed them before bed. I see a faint outline standing on the other side of the glass. It's so dark, it almost blends into the room. I swallow a lump in my throat. My knees feel weak. I step back to the bedroom and shut the door. That's where I am now, sitting on my bed, lights on, door locked. It's 5 in the morning. I'm still awake. I can't take my eyes off the bedroom window, which is also that same foggy glass. Something is shifting inside it. I feel like it's waiting for me to come closer. I'm afraid if I do, it will grab me. Or worse, it will step out and replace me. I can't keep living like this, but I don't know how to stop it. My head hurts, my stomach is in knots, and my entire body is shaking. That's all I've got. That's what's happening. And I have no clue what it wants from me, except maybe to escape the glass and take my spot in this miserable apartment. And I'm terrified I might let it. I first stepped into the foyer of my family's old mansion on a windy afternoon. The front door creaked open, and the air inside felt stale. Dust floated around me in the dim light. My heart pounded, and I noticed my own breath sounded louder than usual. I'd never been in this place before, but it belonged to my family for generations. I didn't like the silence. There was an itch in the back of my mind, like the house was waiting for me to do something. I felt exposed, as if I was being watched. But there was no one else inside. At least I couldn't see anyone. I set my duffel bag on the floor and looked around the entryway. The wallpaper was peeling in spots, and I saw old pictures hanging crooked on the walls. The frames were dusty, the glass was yellowed, and I didn't recognize any of the people in those photographs. Their eyes seemed to follow me, but I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. To the right, I saw a large wooden staircase leading to the second floor. Its steps were dark and looked worn down in the middle, like countless feet had traveled up and down for decades. I felt a slight chill when I looked at it. I tried to ignore it, but my gaze kept drifting back to those steps. I walked across the foyer and tested one of the bottom steps with my foot. It squeaked. At first, I thought it was just old wood. Then I heard another creak, a few steps higher. But I hadn't put my weight on that part of the staircase. The sound echoed through the foyer and I felt my skin tighten. I glanced up, but I didn't see anyone. I stared for a moment, waiting for another sound. Nothing. Just silence. That evening, I tried to settle in. I found a single armchair in one of the sitting rooms. It faced a fireplace, though I had no intention of lighting a fire. I wasn't sure if the chimney was even safe. The furniture smelled musty, and the cushions were lumpy. A few broken chairs and a table missing a leg stood against the walls. I saw old drapes covering narrow windows, letting in only slivers of light. Everything felt heavy. I also felt a constant weight on my chest, like the house itself was bearing down on me. Around 9 or 10 at night, the wind outside picked up, and I realized the house was drafty. Every gust caused some part of the house to groan or whine. I heard scraping sounds from different rooms. Sometimes it sounded like loose shutters. Other times it sounded like someone shifting furniture upstairs. I decided to check the upper floor because the noises were getting on my nerves. I went to the staircase and flicked on an old flashlight I'd brought from my car. When I put my foot on the first step, the wood squeaked. Then, right above me, I heard a louder squeak. It was like an answer. My stomach twisted. I aimed the flashlight upwards, but nothing moved. I took another step, and again I heard that second squeak. It felt like I was walking in sync with someone I couldn't see. My pulse raced, and I took a deep breath. I told myself it was just the age of the house. Old beams and boards shift. Still, I felt uneasy. I pressed on, stepping slowly, shining the flashlight on each stair as I moved. When I was about halfway up, I smelled something damp, like old leaves or rotting wood. I tried to breathe through my mouth. Then I felt the hairs on my neck rise because I heard a gentle tapping sound. It came from behind me, near the bottom of the stairs. I froze. The tapping stopped. I turned around and shone my flashlight toward the foyer. I saw nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I forced myself to keep going. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched out to both sides. The flashlight beam showed torn wallpaper, dusty floors, and closed doors. The wind outside rattled the windows at the end of the hall. Everything smelled old. I decided to turn left. I walked past one door, then another. I tried the doorknobs. One was locked. The other opened into an empty bedroom filled with junk. I moved the flashlight around, saw a broken bed frame, a stained mattress, and some wooden boxes. Then I heard a creak in the hallway behind me, like a footstep. I swung around. The hallway was dark and still. I stepped out, shining my flashlight in both directions. Nothing. But I sensed movement, like a shift in the air. My hands felt sweaty. My chest felt tight. I told myself to breathe. I remember mumbling something under my breath, a quick curse because I felt cornered. I decided I'd check one more door, then go back downstairs. I tried the next door on my left. It led to a smaller room that smelled of mothballs. I saw a built-in bookshelf against the far wall filled with old books. When I stepped inside, the floor groaned under my weight. I checked the walls, the ceiling. They looked intact, though covered in dust. I walked to the bookshelf and examined some of the titles. Most were family records or journals, old leather-bound notebooks. I picked one up. The cover was worn. It had my last name on it, stamped in faded letters. I flipped through it and found handwritten pages describing daily events in the house from decades ago. I read a few lines. It mentioned odd occurrences, footsteps at night, and sightings of shapes on the stairs. That made my scalp prickle. I felt a small wave of nausea, but I kept reading. It said something about the staircase holding echoes of those who walked here before. That was the exact phrase, echoes of those who walked here before. I heard a loud creak from somewhere outside the room. My heart jumped. I stuffed the notebook in my jacket pocket. Then I hurried back into the hallway, shining the flashlight left and right. No one was there. I headed toward the staircase. I wanted to go back down. As I approached the top of the stairs, I felt a sudden pressure in my ears, like the air changed. My flashlight flickered. I stepped onto the top stair. It squeaked. Then in front of me, another step creaked by itself, moving downward. It sounded like someone was descending the stairs ahead of me, but I saw nothing. I tasted bile in my mouth. My pulse hammered against my skull. I tried to stay calm. I took each step, following that phantom creak. Step after step, the wood complained. Sometimes it came from right under my feet. Other times it echoed a few steps below. When I reached the last step at the bottom, I felt a rush of cold air. My flashlight grew dim, so I smacked it with my palm. The light steadied. I walked away from the stairs, toward the sitting room where I'd left my bag. But I stopped in my tracks when I heard footsteps behind me, quick and light, going up the staircase again. I spun around, shining my flashlight. I saw something dark at the top of the stairs. It looked like a shape, just a vague outline. Then it vanished behind the corner of the hallway. I stumbled a little, losing my balance. I fell back against the wall. My shoulders ached. I turned off my flashlight for a moment, trying to slow my breathing. I couldn't stay still for long. The house felt too active. I turned the flashlight back on and walked to the sitting room. I grabbed my bag and pulled out a small lantern I'd brought as a backup. I lit it and placed it on the floor so I'd have a steady light source. I sat in the armchair, watching the doorway. My stomach felt knotted. The wind rattled the windows and the old wooden beams groaned overhead. I heard subtle rustling noises above me, like someone shifting their weight on the floor. Sometimes it sounded like a soft whisper. I couldn't make out any words, just a faint hiss. I stayed in the chair for a long time. My body felt tense. I kept checking the hallway, expecting to see a figure or hear footsteps. At one point, I closed my eyes to calm down, but I snapped them open again when I heard the stairs groaning. This time, it sounded like multiple steps in sequence, as if someone was pacing up and down. I forced myself to stand and walk to the base of the staircase, carrying the lantern. My throat felt dry. I hovered at the bottom step and listened. I heard a step squeak near the middle, then near the top, then near the bottom. I looked up. The entire staircase was dimly lit by my lantern. I saw each old step, each piece of scratched wood. My chest tightened. I didn't see any physical person, but I heard the sounds of movement. Then I noticed something. The wood itself seemed to shift, as if breathing. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a slight swelling and contracting like a slow pulse. I rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, a subtle motion. My entire body tensed, and I felt sweat running down my back. I gripped the lantern handle and backed away. My hands were shaking. The noise continued, a slow creaking, then random footsteps, then a pause. I felt a sense of dread, but I also sensed that the house wanted me to witness this. I can't explain how I knew. It just felt that way, like an unspoken pull. I kept my lantern raised and retreated to the foyer. I dropped into a crouch behind a small table that was pushed against the wall, my breath shaky. My knees ached. I strained my ears, waiting for more sounds. After several minutes, everything went quiet. I stayed crouched, trying to make sense of it. My body felt stiff. My heartbeat was so fast it hurt my chest. Eventually, I stood up and walked back to the sitting room, keeping an eye on the staircase the entire time. It was still again, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. I pulled the old notebook out of my pocket. I wanted to read more, but my hands were trembling. I decided to set it aside, afraid of what else I might find. I needed sleep, but I didn't trust any bedroom. I felt safer in the sitting room, where I had a view of the main hallway. I unrolled a sleeping bag on the couch. I kept my lantern lit, placing it on a side table so I could see the corridor. I laid down, staring at the ceiling. The couch felt lumpy, and the smell of old fabric bothered me. My mind churned with everything that had happened. Each time the house made a sound, I stiffened. Once or twice I heard the stairs groan again, but I stayed put. I dozed off around dawn, I think. At least the sky looked lighter through the drapes when I opened my eyes next. In the morning, I felt drained. My back hurt from the couch and my head felt cloudy. I decided to explore the house in daylight. Maybe I'd find some explanation for the noises. Maybe I'd discover warped floorboards or vents causing illusions. I walked through the foyer, down a hallway to a large dining room with a long wooden table. The chairs were dusty. The ceiling had a chandelier full of spider webs. I ran a finger across the table's surface and felt grit. As I moved through the house, I noted every creak and shift. Most rooms looked abandoned, with old furniture and boxes stacked along the walls. I kept coming back to the staircase, though. Even in daylight, it looked intimidating. The banister felt smooth, and the steps had cracks and scratch marks. I tried pressing on them one by one, seeing if any special mechanism existed. The boards gave a little, but nothing unusual. Still, a feeling of unease followed me every time I stepped on it. Around midday, I heard a faint scraping sound above me. I hurried upstairs, but I only found empty corridors. I opened closets, checked behind doors, and found only dust and broken furniture. Yet I felt watched the whole time. By late afternoon, I felt on edge. My stomach growled, and I realized I hadn't eaten much. I went to the kitchen. It smelled of old grease and mold. The counters were warped, and the sink was rusted. I had some canned food with me, so I opened a can of soup and ate it cold. The quiet was unsettling. My spoon scraped against the can, and the noise echoed. When I finished, I tossed the can in a trash bag I'd brought. As I walked back toward the foyer, I heard the faint sound of wood shifting again. I glanced at the staircase. No movement. I decided to check the library room upstairs once more. I climbed carefully, pausing whenever I heard a squeak. I noticed that certain steps squeaked even when I didn't put weight on them. I reached the top, turned right this time, and found the library door. The knob turned smoothly. Inside, I saw tall shelves of old books. Dust motes hung in the sunlight coming from the large windows. I smelled old paper and that faint, musty odor. The floor creaked under me as I walked around. I saw family records, genealogies, ledgers, and diaries. Some spines had my family name on them. Others were just blank. I felt drawn to a heavy ledger near the bottom shelf. I pulled it out. It listed details of the house, renovations, expansions, repairs. The notes mentioned the staircase more than once. One entry talked about replacing parts of it decades ago, but the wording was strange. It said something about preserving the spirit of the stairs. I felt a chill run through my arms. I also found a page referencing how the house's older residents believed the staircase held the collected steps of everyone who ever lived here. That line stuck with me. It matched the old notebook's talk about echoes. I closed the book and placed it back. My heart felt heavy. I heard a creaking noise just outside the library door. I froze. The handle jiggled. I swallowed hard and stepped back, aiming my flashlight at the door. Then, the jiggling stopped. I opened the door quickly, shining the light into the hallway. Empty. But I felt a cold breeze swirl around my legs. I decided to head downstairs again. I passed by the top of the staircase. My reflection in a dusty mirror on the wall startled me. I stared at myself for a second, noticing the sweat on my forehead and the dark circles under my eyes. My shirt felt damp on my back. I took a long breath and started down the steps. Immediately, the boards responded with a series of groans, as if adjusting to my presence. Part of me wanted to run, but I forced myself to keep steady. Halfway down, I heard a whisper-like sound, soft and raspy, coming from beneath the stairs. I crouched and leaned over the banister, shining my flashlight into the darkness. I saw nothing but old wooden beams. The sound faded, replaced by the same slow creaking that made my heart race. I hurried down the rest of the steps. When I reached the bottom, I put a hand on the banister. I felt a slight vibration like a gentle tremor passing through the wood. It pulsed for a moment, then stopped. I spent the rest of that day trying to decide if I should leave. My body felt worn down. My head ached, but the house seemed to exert a pull on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wanted me to uncover more. I didn't see a living soul anywhere, but I kept sensing movements, hearing soft whispers, feeling slight changes in the air. And always, the staircase was at the center of it, those steady groans, squeaks, and footsteps that didn't belong to me. Every time I looked at it, I felt my heart flutter. By nightfall, the wind picked up again. The boards around me started their chorus of low moans. I stood in the foyer staring at the staircase in the faint glow of my lantern. I heard footsteps on the steps, one after another, as if someone was ascending, but no one was there. A chill crawled over my arms. I stayed where I was, breathing slowly, waiting. The footsteps faded. The house went quiet, yet it felt alive. I knew it was just me in that foyer, but it never felt that way. I still don't understand everything about this place. The more I explore, the more I realize that the house has its own intentions. It doesn't talk. It doesn't show me a figure I can confront. But it makes itself known through every creak, every groan, every whisper of wood. And that staircase remains the focus. It's like it wants me to follow those invisible steps, to learn something about the people who came before me. I'm not sure if I can handle what I'll find. But for now, I have no choice. This house is mine, and it's not letting me go. I just hope I can hold on to my sanity while I figure out its secrets. I woke up on a Tuesday feeling groggy and annoyed. I had barely slept because I kept hearing weird creaks in the hallway. My bathroom light also flickered every time I turned it on. The building was old, and I always blamed these things on the wiring or the pipes. That morning, I turned on the shower, letting the water heat up while I brushed my teeth. I stepped in and stood under the hot water until the entire bathroom filled with steam. When I got out, I glanced at the fogged-up mirror. That's when I saw a faint, scratchy line, almost like someone had rubbed a finger across the glass. I leaned in, but I couldn't make out any specific shape or word. It looked more like a scribble. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I had touched the mirror without noticing. I kept getting ready for work. I threw on a shirt, grabbed my keys, and headed out. All day, I felt uneasy. It was like I was forgetting something, and that feeling stayed with me while I sat in traffic. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to that line on the mirror, but I told myself it was nothing. When I got home that evening, I heated up some leftovers and watched TV for a while. I tried to relax and not think about it, but I decided to take another shower to wash off the stress of the day. The water helped my shoulders loosen up, and I felt my body relax. Then I stepped out onto the bath mat, wiped my face, and stared at the mirror again. This time there was a clear pattern. I saw 3 lines. They looked like they were drawn by a finger. I walked up to the mirror and wiped the steam away with my palm, but when the condensation returned a minute later, the lines showed up again. They seemed to be set into the mirror. I didn't understand it. I took a few breaths and told myself the mirror was old, or that some previous tenant had scratched it. I ignored the chill in my chest and went to bed. The next morning, the lines were still there after my shower. Now they looked more like letters, but I couldn't tell if they spelled anything. I stood with my towel around my waist, staring at them. It gave me a nervous twitch in my stomach, but I left for work anyway. During the day, I kept telling myself to forget it. I imagined my landlord laughing if I said something about letters appearing in the steam. He'd probably say I needed to get the mirror replaced or stop taking such hot showers. That night, I noticed my kitchen faucet was dripping. I twisted it tight, but when I came back an hour later, it was running. Not a drip, running. I got irritated because water isn't cheap. I turned it off again. I made sure it was secure. Before going to bed, I checked the faucet. Everything was fine. Then around midnight, I woke up to the sound of water running again. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding in my ears, and rushed to the kitchen. The faucet was running full blast. The handle was flipped all the way up as if someone had moved it. I stood there in my boxers, shivering from the sudden adrenaline. I turned off the faucet, looked around, and saw nothing out of place. I tried to calm down by drinking a glass of water. Then I went back to bed. My sleep was filled with half-dreams about shapes in the mirror and the sound of running water. The next morning, I felt like a zombie. I took another shower, mostly because I needed to wake up. I looked at the mirror the moment I got out. There was a single word now, but it was messy. I couldn't understand it. It might have been 5 letters, but they were scrambled. I wiped the mirror again and stared, trying to see if it was my imagination. The letters stayed there, hidden under the moisture. My scalp started tingling, and I felt a knot in my throat. I decided I was running late and walked out of the bathroom. The next few days got weirder. The word changed slightly every morning. By the 3rd day, it looked almost like sorry or story. I couldn't tell which. On the 4th day, I noticed the water in the kitchen didn't just turn on at night. Sometimes I'd walk in after watching TV, and it would be running on its own. I thought about telling someone, but I didn't want them to think I was losing it. I tried ignoring everything for a while, but each time I brushed it off, something else happened. On Friday night, I heard a strange scraping noise in my bedroom. It sounded like someone was dragging a piece of metal across the wood floor. I jumped out of bed and turned on the light. I saw nothing. I checked under my bed and the closet behind the curtains. Nothing was there. I stood there in my shorts, heart racing, ears straining for any other sounds. The scraping had stopped, but then the door to my bedroom creaked even though it was closed. I walked over to it and pulled it open. The hallway was dark. I flipped on the hall light. Everything looked normal. The old wallpaper, the dusty floorboards, my laundry pile by the front door. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about the mirror. It felt like something wanted my attention. The next morning, I took another hot shower. When I got out, there were 2 words on the mirror. They looked like UO. I stood there in my towel, heart pounding, my hands turning clammy. I reached out and touched the letters. They didn't wipe away. My finger slid over the glass, but the letters remained. My stomach flipped. I had never felt that level of unease before. I went to the living room and sat on my couch. I turned on some music to clear my mind. I didn't want to think about who or what was leaving messages. I tried to distract myself by doing some cleaning. I vacuumed the carpet, scrubbed the kitchen counters, and took out the trash. But throughout the day, the silence in the apartment felt loaded. I found myself glancing over my shoulder every time I walked down the hallway. I kept the lights on even though it was broad daylight outside. That night I couldn't avoid the shower forever, so I took another one, but I kept it quick. When I got out, I glanced at the mirror. The message had changed. Now it said, "You owe me." The letters were clearer, almost as if someone had practiced writing them out. I felt a surge of panic. My breathing got shallow, and I grabbed the edge of the sink. I wanted to ask out loud, "Who are you?" But I didn't want to hear an answer. Then I noticed the reflection of the bathroom door in the mirror. It moved slightly, even though I hadn't touched it. I spun around, expecting to see someone. The door was still. I pushed on it. It swung open without a sound. I checked the hallway. Nothing there. I shut the door and got dressed. I went to the living room, turned on every light, and tried to watch some dumb comedy on TV to calm down. I didn't laugh once. The entire time I felt a presence behind me, like someone was there. I forced myself to talk about it in my head. Maybe it's some spirit. Maybe it's the ghost of someone from my past. But I hadn't lost anyone close to me, and I hadn't experienced anything like this before. Then I remembered a time I hurt someone on purpose. I had betrayed a friend a few years back over some money. We never spoke again. I tried to convince myself it couldn't be related, but my stomach kept clenching. The messages got bolder. Every day I'd see new words on the mirror, always referencing what I owed or how I needed to fix what I did. One morning it said, "Pay for your mistakes." I got dressed as fast as I could and left the apartment. When I came home that night, the faucet in the kitchen was running again. I marched over and turned it off, cursing under my breath. My hallway light flickered and died. Then I heard the door of my bedroom squeak from across the apartment. My scalp tingled and I felt my jaw tighten. I shouted, "Enough!" My voice echoed in the empty rooms, but I didn't get a response. I checked my bedroom. The door was halfway open, though I'd left it closed. The floor creaked under my feet and I felt a gust of cold air pass by my legs. I didn't have the windows open and the AC was off. I looked around for drafts but found nothing. Then I heard a whisper right behind my ear. It was faint. I couldn't make out the words. I spun around, fists clenched, but there was nobody. I felt sweat run down my back. I decided to call an old friend to get out of my place for a while. I went to a bar, told him I was feeling restless at home, but I didn't mention anything about the mirror or faucets. We talked about sports and random stuff, but the entire time I checked my phone, expecting some weird text. When I got home late that night, all the lights were off, even though I was sure I left some on. The apartment felt freezing. I walked down the hallway, and when I reached the bathroom, I heard a whisper again, like it was inside the walls. My neck hairs stood up. I grabbed the doorknob and pushed the bathroom door open. The mirror was cloudy, even though I hadn't used the shower. The words across it said, "Admit it." I took a shaky breath. I recognized that maybe it was connected to my guilt about what I did a few years back. I had cheated someone out of some money in a business deal. I never apologized. I tried not to think about it, but it always hovered in the back of my mind. Now this invisible force or spirit or whatever it was seemed determined to make me face it. I leaned closer to the mirror. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself I'd address it, but I didn't even know how. I said, "I'm sorry," out loud, just to see if anything would happen. At first, nothing changed. Then the lights flickered, and the mirror went blank for a second. I felt an intense chill on my arms, like icy fingers dragging over my skin. When I blinked, new words formed. "Fix it." My heartbeat thudded in my chest. I paced around the apartment. The tapping in the walls grew louder. The faucet started dripping again, and the door to my bedroom scraped against the floor. My breath came fast and shallow. I sat on my couch, burying my face in my hands. I stayed like that until the noises stopped. When I looked up, the apartment was silent. The air felt heavy, but still. By morning, I felt determined to do something. I took a quick shower, not letting it get too steamy, trying to avoid reading the mirror. I planned to call that old friend I had betrayed and try to apologize. I found his number in my contacts and wrote him a long message, explaining how I felt guilty about everything. I tried to be straightforward, telling him I knew I'd been in the wrong. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit send. I stepped into the bathroom to face whatever message was waiting. The mirror had 2 words. Good start. My stomach did a flip. I didn't want to accept that this thing was reading my thoughts or seeing my actions, but it sure felt that way. I went to the kitchen, made a quick breakfast, and checked my phone. My old friend responded with a short text. He was surprised to hear from me, but he agreed to meet for coffee. I felt both relief and dread. The rest of the day was quiet. I still heard slight creaks in the hallway, but nothing like before. The water in the kitchen stayed off and the lights didn't flicker. Later that night I had a hard time sleeping, but there were no more weird noises. I kept waiting for the next sign. The next morning I took another shower, let the steam build, and checked the mirror. I only saw my reflection. The glass was foggy, but there were no letters or strange lines. I felt a surge of hope. I met my old friend that afternoon. We spoke for a while, cleared the air. I admitted my wrongdoings. He forgave me, but said he needed time to think about whether we could be friends again. I understood. I drove home feeling lighter. That night, I switched on the bathroom light, half expecting the mirror to show something else. It was blank. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. Then I heard a faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it. I waited, but it didn't repeat. The apartment felt normal, or at least less threatening than before. I wasn't sure if this was over or if it was just a break. My anxiety remained, but the tension in the air seemed reduced. I haven't seen any more writing in the mirror since then. The faucets have stayed off. The door doesn't squeak at night anymore. The hallway floor still creaks sometimes, but it feels like normal old building noise. Even so, I can't shake the feeling that something was here. Maybe it still is, watching me, waiting to see if I really learn from my mistakes. I try not to think about it too hard. I keep my phone on me at all times, ready to reach out to people I've wronged, just in case that's what this presence wanted. But whenever I'm home alone and the place gets quiet, I notice my heart picking up speed. I pause, listen for whispers, and check the bathroom mirror. So far it's clean, but I stay alert. I don't want to ignore any warning signs again. That's how it all started, and I don't need a repeat of those nights. I'd rather face my guilt head on than see those words appear in the steam again. I arrived at the Grand Pavilion Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon. The place looked old and grand, with gold trim on the walls and thick carpet that muffled every step. I came here for a conference about business strategies, but I never expected anything unusual. I just wanted a decent room and a quiet night's sleep. When I checked in, the lobby smelled like polished wood and leather. The woman at the front desk spoke in a rushed tone. She handed me my key and pointed me toward the elevator. She didn't smile, and she didn't make small talk. I remember feeling a slight tension in the air, but I shrugged it off. I had a schedule to keep. My room was on the 7th floor, near the end of a long hallway with dim lighting and old wallpaper. Each step along the carpet felt soft, almost too soft, like the floor sank a little under my feet. The walls had faint stains, and the ceiling lights flickered once when I passed under them. I got to my door, slid the key in, and entered the room. It was plain, with a large bed and dark furniture that smelled of dust and aging wood. I dropped my suitcase, checked the bathroom, turned on the TV for a second, then decided to explore the hotel before dinner. That evening, I walked around the lobby, the banquet halls, and the lounge. I saw polished marble floors in the main corridors, large mirrors that needed cleaning, and chandeliers that seemed to flicker every now and then. A few people in suits walked by, talking about the conference. I nodded at them, but nobody seemed interested in conversation. After I had a quick meal in the dining room, I went back upstairs. I planned to review my notes for the next day. Instead, I felt restless and decided to wander the hallways a bit more. It was close to midnight when I left my room again. The hallway on my floor was almost silent. I could hear the faint hum of the hotel's ventilation system. When I passed the elevator, I saw that the light above it glowed weakly, like it needed replacement. The corridor had a slight draft, making the air feel stale. I glanced at the doors I passed, noticing the way their numbers were worn or scratched. One door had chipped paint near the handle. Another had a loose metal plaque. I didn't think much of it at first. Old hotels often have wear and tear. But when I reached the end of the hallway, I saw a turn that I hadn't noticed before. It looked like the corridor continued around a corner, even though I remembered only one main hallway on this floor. I stood there for a second, uncertain if I was mixing up directions. I decided to keep walking. Maybe there was an extra wing or some old service hallway that had been converted for guests. I turned the corner and kept going. The carpet looked the same, but the lights felt dimmer. A few doors lined the walls, each with a brass number. I tried to read the numbers, but the light was too weak. I heard a faint buzzing from the overhead lamps. When I took another step, one of them flickered, then returned to normal. The hallway continued straight, but it felt longer than it should have. I glanced behind me. I expected to see the corner I'd just passed, but it looked farther away. I frowned, wondering if I was just tired. I told myself I'd just walk a little farther and then head back. As I moved on, the corridor seemed to stretch out. The walls had the same pattern of faded wallpaper, and the carpet had the same color and texture, but the distance between the doors felt off. I walked by door after door, but each one was separated by a long gap of blank wall. I also started noticing little signs of disrepair: cracks in the ceiling, stains on the carpet, dust along the edges of the floor. The air smelled musty and stale. My footsteps sounded too loud, like I was the only person on the entire floor. I decided to stop and turn around. I felt uneasy. I hadn't seen any signs of other guests. I hadn't heard any movement or voices. When I turned to go back, I saw the hallway stretching behind me in the same pattern. I couldn't see the elevator or the corner where I'd turned. It was just more hallway. My mouth went dry, and I felt a tightness in my chest. I took a slow breath and forced myself to stay calm. I reminded myself that it was just an old building and maybe I'd gotten turned around. I picked a direction at random and started walking again. After a few more steps, I heard a soft thump. It sounded like footsteps on carpet, but far away. I paused and listened. The sound vanished. I kept going. The overhead lights flickered again. Now I saw a door with a number that looked crooked. The plaque hung sideways, barely attached. I leaned in and tried to read it. It looked like 729 or maybe 739. The metal was scratched. I thought I heard a faint whisper behind the door. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then a faint laugh, like somebody was stifling a giggle. I jumped back. My heart pounded. I knocked once. No answer. I backed away, feeling my skin crawl. I walked faster, hoping to see a sign or a hallway exit. Instead, I came upon a T-intersection that hadn't been there before. To the left was another corridor with more doors. To the right, the same. I stood there, turning my head, trying to figure out where I was. The walls had the same design. The lights buzzed. My palms started sweating. I swallowed hard. I took the path to the right. After a minute, I reached a dead end with a single door that had no number. I tried the handle. Locked. I turned around and walked back to the T-intersection. I went the other way. The corridor twisted and turned, leading me to another set of identical doors. The sense of distance was strange. Sometimes it felt like I walked only a few feet before another turn appeared. Other times the hallway stretched on and on with no turns at all. My heart kept beating faster. I felt a slight tremble in my arms. My legs felt tense, ready to run. The hotel seemed to have changed into a maze. At one point, I felt a light vibration in the floor, as if someone behind one of the doors was walking around or moving furniture. I heard a muffled voice, but I couldn't make out words. I wanted to knock and ask for directions, but the doors gave off a weird feeling. My gut told me to avoid them. Each time I passed a door, I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like the air shifted. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to remember the path I had taken, but it was impossible. I turned so many corners, and the layout seemed to keep changing. I began leaving small scuff marks on the carpet with my shoe, hoping I would see them if I went in circles. But I never saw them again. Every hallway looked fresh, without any sign of my marks. At one point, I stopped and crouched down, running my hand along the floor. It felt dusty, as if nobody had walked there in ages. My stomach felt tight and my mouth was dry. I tried not to panic. I walked in a straight line for several minutes, ignoring side corridors. The lights flickered above me every few seconds. I kept my eyes forward. I counted my steps, reaching into the hundreds. The corridor never ended. My footsteps were the only sound, except for the occasional soft laughter behind a closed door. I tried a few doors, but they were all locked. My breathing grew heavier. I wished I had a bottle of water. My throat felt scratchy. After what felt like an hour, I saw a door slightly ajar on my left. I approached it carefully. The brass number was missing. I pushed the door open and saw a small storage closet. It had a single shelf covered in dusty towels. An old vacuum cleaner stood in the corner. I stepped inside, thinking I might find something useful, like a phone or maybe a hotel map. There was nothing but old cleaning supplies. The smell was musty and stale. I felt more trapped than ever. I left the closet and stepped back into the hallway. I heard another laugh from somewhere behind me. It was low and muffled, like it came through a wall. I whipped around, but I saw nobody. I clenched my fists. My heart pounded against my ribs. My skin was damp with sweat, and my shirt clung to my back. I rubbed my face, trying to stay focused. My thoughts were racing with questions. How was this hallway changing? Who was laughing? Was there some kind of trick in the architecture? Part of me wanted to pound on every door until someone answered, but I was scared of what I'd find. I tried to keep walking. My feet felt heavy, but I forced them to move. Eventually, I reached a spot where the corridor sloped downward. I hadn't noticed any slope before, but the floor definitely slanted. I took careful steps, worried I might trip. The lights on the ceiling flickered more rapidly now. I glanced up and saw the bulb swinging slightly, like there was a breeze, but the air was still. I kept going, following the slope until I reached a heavy metal door with an exit sign overhead. The sign glowed red. I let out a shaky breath, relieved to see a possible way out. I pushed the metal bar on the door. It clicked, but it didn't open. I pushed again, harder. The bar moved, but the door stayed shut. I kicked it once, but it was solid. I tried pulling, but there was no handle. My stomach sank. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I looked around for another path. The corridor behind me was pitch dark now. The overhead lights had gone out. I saw only the red glow from the exit sign, which barely lit the doorway. My eyes strained to see. I took a few steps back, but the darkness pressed in on me. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the corridor. The beam showed the same old carpet and wallpaper, but the walls looked grimy now, with dark streaks near the floorboards. I stepped backward, not sure what to do. Then I heard a click like a latch opening. I spun around to look at the exit door. It opened by itself, just a crack. I felt my heart pound in my throat. I didn't want to stand in the hallway any longer. I pushed the door wide and stepped through. On the other side, I found another corridor. It looked almost identical to the one I'd come from, but the lighting was slightly brighter. I felt a wave of frustration. This hallway had the same pattern of doors, the same wallpaper, but there was a faint smell of paint, like someone had done some work recently. I walked forward, shining my phone's flashlight on each door. They all had the same dull brass numbers, but they seemed in better condition. The carpet had fewer stains. I didn't see any sign of an elevator or a stairwell. I tried the first door on my left. It was locked. I tried the next one, also locked. When I reached the third door, I noticed it was cracked open. I nudged it with my foot. The hinges squeaked. Inside, I saw a single lamp on a small table. The lamp was off. The room smelled like old furniture. A heavy chair stood near a window that showed total darkness outside. I stepped in and clicked on the lamp. Nothing happened. I tried the switch on the wall. Still no light. I turned my phone's flashlight around the room. There was a bed with no sheets, a small dresser, and an empty closet. I saw my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. My face looked pale and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I wanted to rest, but the silence felt oppressive. I left the room, leaving the door open. Back in the hallway, the lights flickered again. I walked further and passed a few more doors. They were all locked. Then I heard the laugh again, closer this time. It was a short burst of sound, almost like someone mocking me. I turned around, shining my flashlight down the corridor. I saw no one. I stared at the closed doors, half expecting one to open. Nothing happened. My hands shook. I clenched my teeth. I forced myself to keep moving. After several more minutes of walking, I saw another intersection. I hurried toward it, hoping for a sign, maybe a stairwell or an elevator. But it was just another branching hallway, identical to what I'd seen before. I felt a sharp wave of panic. My throat felt tight, and I started breathing faster. I wiped my palms on my pants. I heard a faint scraping sound, like nails against wood. It seemed to come from behind one of the doors. I stopped and listened. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. My arms prickled with goosebumps. I turned down the new hallway, my phone's flashlight bobbing with each step. The doors along this section had darker wood, almost black. The numbers were missing, leaving just small holes where the screws used to be. The overhead lights were dimmer than before, and every few seconds one of them fizzled out for a moment. I walked slowly, trying to ignore the dryness in my mouth and the churning in my stomach. My body felt tense. My heart kept thumping hard. I kept imagining the corridor stretching forever. I wondered if I would ever find my way back to the normal floors. I passed by another door that looked slightly ajar. I stopped. My flashlight revealed a narrow gap. I tried the knob. It turned, but the door felt stuck. I put my shoulder against it and pushed. It gave way and opened into a small stairwell. I looked up and down the stairs. They were made of concrete with peeling paint on the walls. A weak bulb lit the area, flickering. At least it was different from the endless corridors. I stepped onto the first stair, then I paused. The air smelled dank, like wet cement. The flicker of the overhead bulb made everything look unstable. My legs felt weak, but I started down the stairs anyway. I wanted to get away from the corridor. I descended one flight, then another. At each landing, I saw a rusted door labeled with some unreadable sign. They were locked when I tried them. I kept going down, counting each step. My shoes scuffed against the concrete and the sound echoed. The tension in my body didn't ease. I kept expecting to hear laughter or footsteps behind me, but it remained quiet, except for my own breathing. When I finally reached what seemed like the bottom, I found another door. It wasn't labeled and it had a heavy metal handle. I grabbed it and pulled. It opened into a small service corridor with a low ceiling. I saw a sign pointing to lobby. My pulse jumped with relief. I followed the arrow through the narrow passage. After about 20 yards, I reached a battered metal door. I pushed it open and found myself in the main lobby, near a staff-only entrance. The lobby lights looked bright compared to where I'd been. I heard the distant sound of someone typing at the front desk. I smelled fresh coffee. I stepped into the open space and felt my shoulders relax. The tension in my chest eased a bit. I saw the woman at the front desk, the same one who gave me my key earlier. She looked at me with raised eyebrows. She didn't ask any questions. I must have looked disheveled and worn out. I walked right past her and headed for the elevator, determined to get my belongings from my room and leave as soon as possible. I felt a pounding in my head, and my thoughts were jumbled. But one thing was clear. I never wanted to walk down those halls again. I just hoped the elevator would still take me to a normal floor and that my room would be there, exactly where I left it. If it wasn't, I planned to walk right out of the hotel without looking back. I didn't care about the conference anymore. I just wanted to escape that endless corridor, that living maze, and step into fresh air again. I still remember how quiet the library was when I first stepped inside. The front doors creaked behind me, and the musty air made my nose itch. I was there for research, thinking I'd grab a few books and head home. But there was something about that place that felt off right away. The overhead lights flickered near the entrance, and I saw a dark corner at the far end of the main floor. I noticed an old leather armchair sitting there, half hidden behind a tall shelf. It drew my attention without any real reason. I felt an urge to walk toward it. The rest of the library didn't matter. I had a list of books I needed, but I kept looking at that armchair. I couldn't explain why. It felt like I had to sit in it, like it was the only seat in the world that mattered. I walked across the library, making my way around a few tables. There weren't many people around. I heard a librarian's chair squeaking at the front desk, but I didn't see anyone else. The shelves were tall, the aisles narrow. The overhead lighting was weak, leaving patches of darkness scattered around. Some areas felt almost abandoned, like nobody had visited them in years. I noticed layers of dust in the corners of the floor. My shoes squeaked on the polished tile. I reached the armchair. It was a deep brown leather seat that looked worn at the edges, and the armrests had small cracks in the material. It was bigger than an ordinary chair, like it was made for someone taller or broader than me. The seat cushion looked flattened, as if it had been used for decades. The leather had scratches here and there. The backrest had an odd symbol impressed near the top. It was faded like a circle with strange lines cutting through it. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to mean. I rubbed my fingers over it. and the leather felt cold. I got a chill in my stomach, the kind of feeling you get when you realize you've just touched something that shouldn't be touched. Despite that, I sat down. The leather creaked under my weight, and the seat felt stiffer than I expected. I leaned back and tried to relax. It wasn't comfortable in the usual sense, but I stayed there. I tried to pull out my notepad to review some notes for my research, but my eyes kept wandering around. The shadows in that corner seemed thicker. I could hear a low hum in my ears, like when you're in a very quiet place and your own body's sounds amplify. I thought it was just me adjusting to the silence, but then I noticed movement at the edges of my vision. I saw what looked like a figure gliding past a bookshelf. It was there 1 second, gone the next. I sat up straight and looked around. There was no one. The library was silent except for the faint buzz of old fluorescent lights. I thought maybe I was tired or seeing things. I decided to get up and grab the books I needed. As I rose from the chair, my legs felt a little heavy, like I'd been sitting for hours, but I knew only a minute or two had passed. I wandered the aisles, searching for the sections I needed. The librarians had the overhead signage, but some parts of the library felt dimmer than others. I saw a security camera in a corner, covered by a layer of dust. My footsteps sounded loud to me. My fingers ran along the spines of books, searching for the reference material on local history. I found a couple of volumes that seemed relevant, then moved to the next shelf. As I reached for another book, I heard a whisper. It sounded close to my ear, like someone trying to get my attention by saying, "Hey!" I jumped and spun around. Nobody was there. My heart pounded. I felt a rush of blood to my face, and I could hear my breath getting shallow. I told myself it was just the old building making noises, or maybe the ventilation system. So I grabbed the books and headed straight back to the armchair. I told myself I could concentrate better in one spot than wandering around. It was an odd decision, given how uneasy that corner made me, but I felt pulled there, like I had no real choice. When I sat down again, I felt the leather seat sink a bit more under my weight, like it recognized me. I opened the first book and tried to read, but my mind kept wandering. Every few pages I felt that same sensation of movement around me, like shapes drifting between shelves. I kept glancing up, expecting to see another patron or maybe a librarian, but I saw no one. Still, I felt sure something was there. My body tensed. My hands were shaky. I started to sweat a little. I heard my own breathing, shallow and uneven. Then I felt a slight pressure on my shoulders. It was like two hands pressing down just for a moment. I sprang up from the chair and spun around. Nothing. I stood there, heart racing, book in hand. I looked at the armchair. The leather on the backrest glistened in the dim light, and for a second I thought it looked damp. I blinked and it looked normal again, though still old and cracked. I put the book down on the small side table next to the armchair and took a breath. My plan was to walk around, maybe clear my head and come back later. But I felt drained. My legs were weak and a wave of exhaustion washed over me, so I sat back down. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, the library lights were still on, but the place seemed darker. I heard a faint voice. It was whispering a name, but it wasn't mine. It sounded like Arterin or something close to that. My heart thumped. I sat up and looked around, but I didn't see anyone. My back felt sweaty and my mouth was dry. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus. I saw the shadowy shapes again, drifting near the shelves. They were darker now, more defined. They seemed to have vague outlines like people, but I couldn't make out faces. They didn't walk. They floated without making a sound. I told myself I was dreaming. Maybe the library was closing, and I had dozed off into a quick nightmare. I stood up carrying the book I'd been reading and thought about leaving. But as I walked away from the armchair, I heard a scraping sound behind me. I turned around and saw the armchair shift slightly, like someone had pushed it, but there was no one. I was about 10 feet away, yet I felt a tug, like a rope around my waist, pulling me back. My head was pounding. My chest felt tight. I tried to ignore it and walked faster toward the main desk, but each step felt harder. By the time I reached the desk, I was breathing hard like I'd run a mile. The librarian at the desk was the same older guy I'd seen earlier. He gave me a concerned look and asked if I was okay. I nodded and tried to speak, but my voice came out hoarse. I asked him how late the library was open. He told me it closed in an hour, which gave me time to gather my things. I headed to a nearby table, sat down, and tried to focus on the books I had picked out. My hands were shaking. I noticed the veins on my wrists felt cold to the touch. I reread the same paragraph over and over again, not absorbing any of it. My mind was still in that corner, still on that armchair. My eyelids felt heavy, like I wanted to sleep right there. So I gathered my stuff and decided to leave. But my curiosity got the better of me. I thought maybe I should try one more time to sit in that armchair and see if I was just scaring myself for no reason. That was a bad idea, but I convinced myself it would ease my mind. I went back. The overhead lights in that section flickered once. The corner felt colder than the rest of the library. I looked at the chair again. It looked the same, but it felt like it was waiting. I rubbed my hands together and forced myself to sit down. The leather felt oddly warm this time. I sank deeper into the seat. I heard a faint creaking noise, almost like a groan. I looked around and saw the same shapes drifting among the shelves. One of them moved closer. I didn't see features, just a black silhouette. My body stiffened. I tried to stand up, but my legs didn't respond. A wave of cold ran up my spine. I was breathing faster. The figure glided closer, then moved sideways and disappeared behind a tall case of books. I heard whispering again, calling that name that wasn't mine. It was clearer now. Arterin. Arterin. My chest tightened. I felt an odd sensation in my head, like someone's voice was echoing inside my skull. I tried to calm down. My fingers clenched the armrests and my knuckles turned white. My arms felt weaker by the second and my eyelids fluttered. The library around me seemed darker. The lights were still on, but everything looked dim, as if a veil was dropping over my vision. I fought the urge to close my eyes, but I blacked out for a moment. When I came to, I was still in the armchair, but I had a pounding headache. It felt like hours had passed. I checked my watch. Only 10 minutes. I stood up too quickly and nearly fell forward. My equilibrium was off. I stumbled toward a shelf and steadied myself. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, loud and fast. I wiped sweat off my forehead. My shirt felt damp. I left the library soon after that. I signed out a few books, thanked the librarian, and forced myself to keep walking until I was outside. The cool evening air hit me in the face, and I took long, deep breaths. My head felt heavy. My arms and legs tingled with pins and needles. I managed to get home, but the rest of the evening was a blur. When I finally went to bed, my sleep was broken by nightmares. That first night, I dreamed of walking through an old corridor lit by flickering lanterns. The walls were made of stone, and I heard faint chanting. Voices called out, "Arterin, come!" I followed them even though I knew I shouldn't. I saw shapes on the walls, like outlines of robed figures. Then I heard a loud thump and woke up, drenched in sweat. My sheets were tangled and my heart raced. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I told myself I wouldn't go back to that library. I felt drained. My skin was pale, and I had dark circles under my eyes. But I needed more reference material for my project. By late afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the same building, telling myself it would just be a quick visit. I tried to avoid that corner, but as soon as I stepped inside, my eyes drifted to the armchair. It was like it was calling me. I kept my distance and went to the other side of the library, but I couldn't focus. The same chills ran across my body, and I felt a bizarre tug, like a magnet in my chest. My heart beat faster. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it got. I gave in. I walked over to the armchair again and stood there, staring at it. The old leather, the cracks on the seat, the faded symbol near the top. My feet felt rooted to the spot. I finally sat down. The moment I did, my back muscles tightened. I heard another whisper, very close this time. It said, "Stay." My eyes darted around. I didn't see anyone. My breath came in short bursts. The shapes in the library appeared again, floating behind the shelves. Their presence felt more real now, like they had weight. I saw one turn its head toward me. No face, just a black void. My lips trembled and I felt tears well up for a second, but I forced them back. As I sat there, my thoughts started to spin. I kept hearing the word Artorin. My vision blurred. My limbs felt cold. I noticed the same symbol from the chair burned in my mind, like I had stared at it for too long. I knew I was losing track of time. I tried to stand, but my energy was slipping away. I felt like the chair was pulling something out of me. My heartbeat slowed. I blinked hard and forced myself to grip the armrests. I pulled myself forward. My body felt like it weighed twice as much as normal. I thought my legs would give out. Finally, I managed to stand. I stumbled out of that corner, panting like I'd just run a marathon. I could still see the shadowy shapes in my peripheral vision, drifting closer whenever I looked away. The overhead lights flickered again, and the hum of electricity got louder. I rushed to the front desk and told the librarian I wasn't feeling well. He offered to call someone, but I just mumbled that I'd be fine. I left in a hurry. Outside, I leaned against a lamppost, trying to catch my breath. My hands were clammy, and my face felt hot. I saw spots in my vision for a moment. Over the next few days, I kept having nightmares. Each night, I saw more details. I was in a different time, wearing clothes that weren't mine. Stone halls, hooded figures, chanting, and always that name, Artorin. I felt panic in these dreams, like I was trapped in some ancient ritual. When I woke up, my body hurt, as if I'd been carrying something heavy. My eyes were bloodshot in the mirror. I knew I was getting worse. I sensed that the armchair wanted me back, to finish whatever it had started. I tried to stay away, but I kept thinking about it. My thoughts would drift to the library in the middle of the day. I'd see flashes of those shapes in the corners of my apartment. I'd hear the floor creak when I was alone. At night, I thought I heard pages turning in the dark right next to my bed. My rational mind told me it was all in my head. But something else told me that I had left a piece of myself in that armchair, and it was calling me to return. Eventually, I forced myself back one last time. I needed to see if I could break away or at least confront it. I arrived at the library and walked straight to that corner. The armchair looked the same, but the air around it felt heavier. My chest tightened, and I found it hard to breathe. My entire body was tense. I reached out and touched the backrest. The leather felt cold and damp. I leaned in and saw the faint symbol again, that circle with lines. It seemed more pronounced, like it had been pressed deeper. I heard a whisper in my ear. Artorin. Accept. My nerves were on fire. I jerked my hand back and stepped away. The shapes appeared again, gliding between the shelves, forming a loose circle around me. I felt surrounded. I realized this thing, whatever power it held, wanted my mind. It was trying to add me to its collection. I felt that in my gut. My head pounded and my vision started to blur. My heart hammered in my chest. I could sense that if I sat down in the armchair again, I might not get up. My voice shook as I spoke out loud, telling it to leave me alone. The words sounded weak in the thick silence. The shapes drifted closer. I gritted my teeth, turned around, and walked away, forcing one step at a time, ignoring the buzzing in my head. I couldn't run. My legs felt heavy, but I didn't stop. Each step felt like I was ripping myself free from something. I reached the exit and yanked the door open. Outside, I fell to my knees on the sidewalk, breathing hard. My chest hurt and my head spun, but I felt relief that I was out. The night air hit my face and I tasted the salt of my own sweat. That was the last time I saw that armchair. I haven't been back to that library. Sometimes when I pass by on the street, I feel a cold wave wash over me, and I keep walking. The nightmares still come and go, but they're weaker now, like echoes fading over time. I'm still afraid it might claim me if I ever sit there again. But for now, I'm done. I'm telling you this because I don't want anyone else getting pulled in. That armchair is more than just a piece of old furniture. It's alive in some way, and I think it's collecting people. I refuse to be part of its collection. I found the clock by accident. I was walking through a flea market on a Saturday afternoon, not really looking for anything. I saw a table covered with old junk, chipped porcelain cups, faded photos, rusty metal boxes. There was a large wall clock in the corner. It had a dark wooden frame cracked along the edges and a dusty glass face. Something about its shape caught my attention. It looked different from the other clocks I'd seen at antique stores or secondhand shops. It felt heavier just by looking at it, like it had a presence. I asked the seller about the price. He gave me a small shrug and said, "It's cheap, $10. I figured that was a bargain for something so old. I paid him and carried the clock to my car, carefully sliding it onto the back seat. I noticed the hands were stuck at 6:15, but I thought it just needed new batteries or a bit of cleaning. When I got home, I set it on a table near the living room sofa. I tried winding it, but the clock didn't react the way I expected. The second hand jerked a little, then froze. I opened the back panel and looked at the gears. They appeared rusty and stiff. I sprayed a bit of lubricant, tapped the parts with a screwdriver, and tried winding it again. For a moment the hands moved, but they seemed slow. Eventually they stopped at 6:15 again. I tried not to get frustrated. I told myself it was just an old mechanism. Maybe it needed professional care. Still, I liked how it looked on my wall, so I decided to hang it up. I hammered a small nail into the wall above my TV and placed the clock there. Right away, I felt a slight chill in the living room. I thought maybe the air conditioning kicked in, but I hadn't turned it on. I ignored the feeling and stood back to look at the clock. The wood frame looked almost black in the dim light of late afternoon. The hands sat there, frozen at 6:15. I tried to move them manually, rotating the minute hand around, but every time I let go, the hand swung back. I got a sudden rush of unease, like a knot in my stomach, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just a broken clock. That night, around midnight, I was in bed reading a book. I heard a strange noise. It was like a chime, but distorted and low. At first, I thought it came from the street outside. I got up, went to the window, and looked out. Everything seemed quiet. Then I heard it again, a hollow, drawn-out sound, like a clock's chime slowed down several octaves. The noise came from the living room. I walked over, turned on the light, and looked at the clock. The face was faintly glowing under the overhead light, and the hands were pointed at midnight. I felt a sharp jolt of confusion. I remembered they had been stuck at 6:15. Now they were at 12 klau, but the gear inside was still jammed. That made no sense. I reached out and touched the glass. It felt cold, almost like ice. I pulled my hand away. I heard a quiet hum or vibration in the air, like feedback from an amplifier. It made my ears ring. My chest felt tight, and my breath got shallow. I stared at the clock's face, and I thought I saw faint shapes or reflections in the glass. I couldn't see them clearly. They looked like silhouettes or outlines of people in old-fashioned clothes. They flickered for a few seconds and vanished. My heart pounded. I realized I was sweating even though the living room felt cold. I shook my head and went back to bed, trying to convince myself I was just tired. Over the next few days, I tried to fix the clock more thoroughly. I watched some online videos about repairing antique clock mechanisms. I took the clock down, removed the back panel, and examined each gear. I cleaned them and made sure everything was lined up. I even tried replacing the old pendulum weight. No matter what I did, the clock would work for a short time and then stop at 6:15. One morning I left it running, checking the time on my phone to see if it kept up. It moved about 5 minutes forward before jerking to a halt. Then the minute hand flipped back to 6:15 like a magnet was pulling it. That same night at midnight I heard the strange chime again. It was deeper this time, almost painful in my ears. My head started pounding. I switched on the living room lights. The clock's face was glowing again, and I got closer to see if there were more reflections. I leaned in. The glass seemed cloudy. I wiped it with a cloth, but the images were coming from inside, not on the surface. The silhouettes looked like people walking around in old-fashioned clothing, maybe from decades ago. I couldn't hear them, but I sensed movement, like a scene playing in slow motion. My mouth went dry. I backed away and my foot bumped into the coffee table, nearly knocking over a lamp. When I steadied myself, I saw the silhouettes fade. The clock's hands were pointed at 12 hours again. For a second, I thought about throwing the clock away. I had this urge to get it out of my house, but another part of me felt attached to it. It was mine now. I told myself I could handle it. Maybe I'd store it in another room. So I took it off the wall and carried it upstairs to the small guest room I use for storage. I placed it on top of a dresser, facing the wall, and left the room. I locked the door. That gave me a moment of relief. I went downstairs, made a cup of tea, and tried to relax. But around midnight, I heard the chime again. It was even louder, echoing through the whole house. My chest felt tight, and my pulse began to race. I ran upstairs, unlocked the guest room, and swung the door open. The clock was glowing, but it was turned around. The glow spilled onto the wall, sending weird shadows across the furniture. I stood there, frozen, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. I flipped the clock around, and the hands pointed straight at 12 Han. The reflection in the glass was stronger this time. I saw a table, chairs, a fireplace. It was like a scene from an older time. I watched a figure pass by, wearing a long dress and carrying something in her hands. I wanted to look away, but my eyes locked onto the scene. My breath felt heavy, like I couldn't get enough oxygen. I grabbed the clock and pulled the pendulum back, hoping to stop whatever was happening. But the images kept flickering. I muttered to myself, telling myself to stay calm, to focus on something else. I left the room, shut the door again, and tried to sleep. My head was pounding. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's outline in the glass. The next day, I decided to take the clock to a repair shop across town. I placed it in a box and drove out in the morning. The repairman took it out and said it was unlike anything he'd seen. He examined the gears and said they were old, but not in horrible shape. He tried to wind it, and it worked for about a minute. Then it froze at 6:15 again. He frowned. He told me he could keep it for a few days and try different parts. I felt relieved. I left it with him and went home. For the first time in days, I slept soundly. No chime woke me. My house felt normal. The air seemed lighter. I realized I'd been so tense around that clock that I hadn't relaxed in a while. But my relief didn't last. 2 days later, the repairman called and asked me to pick up the clock. He said his attempts to fix it failed, and something about it made him uneasy. He actually sounded nervous on the phone. He asked me if I'd had any strange experiences with it. I hesitated, then admitted I had heard odd noises. He cut the conversation short and told me to come get it. When I arrived, the clock was sitting on the counter in a wrapped cloth. He handed it over and refused to take payment. He just wanted it out of his shop. I understood how he felt. I almost told him to keep it, but something inside me pulled me to take it back. So I brought it home again, placing it in the hallway by the front door. I tried to ignore it. I left it on the floor, leaning against the wall. That night, I woke at midnight to a faint chime coming from downstairs. It was less intense than before, probably because the clock wasn't close to my bedroom. Still, my ears recognized it, and my heart started racing again. I hurried down the stairs and saw the clock's hands pointing at 12Y. The glass gave off that same faint glow. My vision felt blurry, and the hallway seemed darker than usual, like the shadows were thicker. I forced myself to pick up the clock. I carried it to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and turned on all the lights. My hands were shaking a bit and my stomach felt tight. As I stood there, the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop. My breath came out in short spurts and the clock chimed again, this time sounding even more warped. The glass showed more reflections, but I couldn't see them well because of the bright kitchen lights. I just sensed flickers of movement. Suddenly it felt like the overhead lights were flickering, but I realized it was me blinking rapidly. My eyes were burning. I turned off the light for a second, hoping to calm myself down. In the darkness, the glow from the clock was impossible to ignore. The entire face looked lit from within, and those shapes moved around like they were living inside the glass. I stepped back until my shoulder hit the wall. I remember pressing my palm against the countertop to steady myself. My thoughts were jumbled, and I just kept thinking, what is this thing? Why does it do this at midnight? My mouth felt dry, and I swallowed hard. The second hand twitched, trying to move, but it was stuck. Yet the time on the face was still midnight. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, and my skin tingled like I had goosebumps everywhere. I didn't sleep much that night. I went back to bed after unplugging the microwave and any electronic device that made a ticking sound. I wanted complete silence. I laid there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to come up. I felt certain that clock was pulling at me somehow. The next day I carried it to the basement. My basement is mostly concrete floors, exposed pipes, boxes of old clothes. I set the clock on a shelf in the corner. Then I moved some cardboard boxes in front of it. I told myself this would keep me safe from its weird nightly show. Around midnight, I sat in my living room and listened. The house felt strange. There was a slight vibration in the air, like a low hum I could sense in my bones. I heard the clock chime again, faint but insistent. It sounded like it was coming through the walls. The air felt heavy. My skin got clammy. My pulse raced. I stood up, unsure of what to do. I forced myself to stay put for a minute, but the tension got worse. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, and my lips felt numb. Finally, I raced downstairs to the basement. The boxes I'd stacked in front of the clock were scattered on the floor, as if someone had pushed them aside. The clock was glowing, lighting up the concrete floor with a pale white color. The hands showed midnight. The second hand jerked, but it never advanced. I crouched down and looked into the glass. The reflection showed a room full of furniture I'd never seen before. There was a fireplace on the far wall, and the bricks looked old. I saw a chair with a high back, a table with a single candle. A figure stood next to the table, facing away from me. My heart pounded so hard my chest hurt. The figure turned slightly, and I saw part of a face, but the image distorted, like interference on a screen. I jumped back, almost losing my balance. The figure disappeared and the chime stopped. I held my breath for several seconds, trying to steady my nerves. I knew I couldn't stay in the house with that clock. I thought about throwing it out, but a strange part of me felt drawn to it, like I needed to keep it until I understood what was happening. It felt almost alive. So I decided to put it in my car trunk and drive it somewhere else for the night. I grabbed it, ignoring the cold sensation that spread through my hands and arms. I carried it up the basement steps. Each step made a dull thud. I felt the weight pressing into my forearms. When I reached my driveway, I unlocked the trunk and shoved the clock inside. I slammed the trunk shut. My lungs burned from holding my breath. I expected some reaction, like a glow seeping through the cracks, but everything remained dark. I went back inside, locked all my doors, and tried to relax in the living room with the TV on. I watched some mindless program, but I couldn't focus. My body felt tense, my shoulders stiff. Around midnight, I realized I didn't hear anything. No chime, no hum, no weird vibrations. I stayed alert though, half expecting the trunk of my car to burst open, but nothing happened. At 2 a.m, I turned off the TV and finally got some sleep. The next morning, I woke early and went to check my car. The trunk was still shut. When I opened it, I saw the clock resting at an angle. The glass looked dull, the hand stuck at 6:15 again. I poked it lightly. No movement, no glow, no sound. I felt a small sense of victory. For a moment I thought maybe the weird events had ended. But that night as I tried to sleep, I heard a faint, far-off chime. It sounded muffled, like it was coming through walls. I realized it was coming from outside, from my car. That heavy feeling returned to my chest. My throat tightened. I'm writing all this because I need a record of what I'm going through. The clock refuses to leave me alone. No matter which room I put it in, the same events repeat at midnight. The time in the house feels messed up. Sometimes I look at my phone and an hour has passed, but it feels like only 10 minutes. Other times, I think 20 minutes have gone by, but it's only 5. My daily routine is getting scrambled. I'm constantly on edge, waiting for that chime. I can't figure out if the clock is broken or if it's pulling me into some strange time loop. All I know is that midnight brings that heavy air, the distorted chime, and those impossible reflections in the glass. And no matter where I hide it, the effect doesn't go away. I've considered throwing it in a dumpster or driving it to some far-off place and leaving it there. But a part of me is scared that it won't solve anything. I'm worried I'll still hear the chime at night. Maybe it's too late to get rid of it. Maybe it's already connected to me somehow. I'm not sure what to do next. For now, I keep it in my basement covered with a cloth. I avoid looking at it. Midnight still comes, and the house still feels strange, but I try not to go downstairs. I stay in my room, listening to that muffled chime, feeling the walls close in just a bit. My arms get goosebumps and my neck tenses, but I try to pretend it's not happening. I can't tell if the clock is just an old piece of junk or if it's some kind of gateway. Every day I think about it, and every night I hear it. My life feels stuck, like I'm trapped in a loop, just like the clock's hands. I'm tired. My eyes feel raw from lack of sleep. My head throbs. But I can't bring myself to smash it. I don't even know if that would help. So I'm stuck with this strange thing, waiting for midnight, hearing that awful, twisted chime, wondering if maybe, one night, the reflection in the glass will show me something I can't unsee. And I'm not sure how to stop it. All I do is wait, tense and alert, hoping the clock won't drag me somewhere I can't return from. I remember arriving at the abandoned village in the late morning. I parked my car on a patch of overgrown grass. There was no fence, no gate, nothing stopping me from walking straight into the old paths. The place smelled like stale earth. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. Some of the houses stood half collapsed with missing roofs or boarded up windows. The wind made a low humming sound as it moved through gaps in the crumbling walls. I felt a rush of excitement. There's something about abandoned places that intrigues me. I like capturing the texture of peeling paint, broken doors, and dusty floors. At the time, I didn't sense anything odd. I was focused on getting good shots of the main street. It was empty, lined with houses whose doors had been left open long ago. Every footstep I took echoed. My boots crunched on shattered glass and loose gravel. The sound kept me aware of my surroundings, but I didn't see anything out of place. My first stop was a small house with a collapsed front porch. I walked inside carefully, checking each step. The floor felt soft under my feet, and I was worried about falling through rotten wood. Once inside, I set up my tripod and started taking pictures of the living room. The furniture was covered in dust. A broken chair lay on its side. Pieces of ceiling had fallen onto a table. I snapped photos from different angles, watching the sunlight pour in from a hole in the roof. The air smelled stale and damp. I remember adjusting the focus on my camera. My breath felt slow and steady. I was alone, but that didn't bother me. I felt a strange calm, like I was documenting the end of an era. After about 20 minutes, I moved on to a few more houses. Every place looked roughly the same. Neglected furniture, paint peeling off walls, and shattered windows. I took dozens of shots, checking them occasionally on my camera's small screen. Nothing seemed unusual at that point. I was just doing my hobby. Later, I found a spot on the main road where an old general store stood. The storefront sign was barely legible. The window glass had cracks that formed a spiderweb pattern. I remember crouching low to get a dramatic angle. The front door was missing. I looked inside and saw empty shelves and a fallen ladder. I took a few shots, then climbed inside to see if there was anything interesting in the back. The air was even more stagnant in there. I could smell mold in the corners. A few newspapers were scattered across the floor, but the print was too faded to read. I stayed in that general store for a while, experimenting with different camera settings. Time slipped by and I realized it was getting late. I decided to finish up by taking a few wide shots of the entire street at dusk. I thought the long shadows and warm light would make for an interesting contrast with the dilapidated buildings. So I walked back outside, found a good vantage point near a broken street lamp, and set my tripod again. The wind had died down, and everything felt still. I had an uneasy feeling for a moment, like the village was holding its breath. But I chalked it up to my imagination and took the pictures. When I was done, I packed up and headed to my car. My legs felt dusty, and my hands were grimy from touching old surfaces. I drove home thinking I had a bunch of potentially great shots to review later. I felt tired, but satisfied. Photography is my escape, my way of exploring forgotten places. That night, I connected my camera to my computer and started scrolling through the images. I saw the usual stuff at first: broken rooms, dusty furniture, interesting angles of half-collapsed roofs. But then I got to a photo where I stood in the foreground, thanks to the timer. I noticed a weird shape near my right side. It was dark, sort of like a person's shadow, but it was slanted in a way that didn't match the direction of the light. I zoomed in, but the pixels only got fuzzier. It looked almost like an arm or a claw, but I couldn't be sure. I felt my forehead tighten. My heart beat a little faster. I reminded myself that sometimes lighting can play tricks on camera sensors. I shrugged and moved on. But as I kept going through the photos, I saw that shape again. In a picture where I stood in the doorway of that small house, the shape was near me. In another shot inside the general store, it was there too. Each time it was darker and slightly more defined. I don't know how to explain it, but looking at it made my stomach turn. My mind started racing with possibilities. Could it be a lens defect? Something stuck on my sensor? But if it was a defect, it should have shown up in every picture at the same spot, right? I felt my palms sweating. I closed the photo viewer for a moment and leaned back in my chair. The quiet hum of my computer made the room feel smaller. I tried to calm down by taking a few deep breaths. Then I opened the viewer again and looked carefully. In some photos, the shape was behind me, almost at my shoulder. In others, it was near my leg. It never appeared when I was pointing the camera away from me. It only showed up in self-timer shots or reflective surfaces. I decided to do a quick test. The next day, I took my camera outside, in broad daylight, near my house. I snapped a few pictures of myself against a blank wall. When I reviewed them on my camera screen, there was no strange shape. I felt relieved for a moment. But later, when I uploaded them onto my computer, that shape was back, and it looked more defined than before. My stomach twisted. I couldn't believe it. It was like it was invisible to the camera's preview screen, but showed up in the final files. I started feeling a constant tension in my chest. My neighbor asked me if I was okay when she saw me one morning. She said I looked tired. I told her I was just busy with a photography project. I couldn't tell her what was actually happening. I didn't want to sound crazy, but in my head I kept thinking about that shape. It was dark, hunched, and vaguely like a figure that wasn't human. Each time I looked at the new photos, it was closer to me, like it was leaning in or reaching out. At night, I began to hear faint noises in my apartment. I'd be editing pictures on my computer when I'd hear something like a soft scrape along the wall or a muffled thump in the hallway. I would get up and check the living room, the bathroom, the kitchen. Nothing was there. I started leaving more lights on. When I tried to sleep, I'd see shadows flicker on the walls, but only for a split second. I felt cold sweats. My heart would thump every time I thought I saw movement. I started to lose track of time, checking the clock constantly. I tried cleaning my camera gear thoroughly. I wiped the lens, the sensor, every part of the body. Then I took a series of test photos with no subject, just pointing at a blank surface. On my camera screen, it looked fine. When I uploaded the images, the shape was in the corner, like it was edging into the frame. I felt panicked. My thoughts spun around the idea that something had attached itself to me. Maybe it came from the village, trapped in those decaying walls, and now it was using my camera as a gateway. I tried deleting the photos. I emptied my recycle bin. I cleared my memory cards, but the shape reappeared in new images. Even photos I took with my phone started showing a faint outline when I transferred them to my computer. I realized that whatever this thing was, it wouldn't go away just because I erased the files. I started avoiding photography, but after a few days I had the urge to test it again. It was like a terrible itch that I needed to scratch. I had to see if it was still there. So I took a single photo of myself in my bedroom mirror. The shape appeared behind me, more defined than ever, with a silhouette that looked bent at the spine. I stared at the photo on my computer screen for a solid minute. My hands shook. I could feel my own pulse in my temples. I knew I couldn't avoid this. It was following me, and it wanted to come out. I felt a strong sense that it was trying to escape from the digital images into my real space. I started double-checking corners in my apartment, expecting to see it in the flesh. Sometimes I thought I did, just at the edge of my vision. It never stayed long enough for me to confirm, but my heart would pound, and I'd break into a sweat. One evening, I decided to confront it somehow. I thought maybe if I took a sequence of photos in a bright location, I could trap it in an overexposed set of images. I went to a well-lit parking lot behind a mall. There were bright lights everywhere. The asphalt was empty except for a few parked cars far away. I set up my tripod and took timed shots of myself. I made sure the exposure was very high, hoping the shape wouldn't be able to form. But when I got home and checked, it was still there, even clearer, like it had adapted. I felt my stomach knot. My mouth went dry. I realized that no matter what I did, the shadow was getting stronger. I had to figure out a way to limit its ability to appear. I tried messing with the camera settings, adjusting shutter speeds, turning off autofocus, or switching to an analog film camera. The results were always the same. The shape was consistent. I started having trouble sleeping. My bed felt too big, and every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that twisted form inching closer. I sat up late, lights on, phone in my hand, searching for any stories or explanations that matched what I was going through. I found nothing that helped. The only advice I could think of was to stop taking photos altogether. But even that didn't feel like a solution because the shape was already part of my life. Eventually, I tried changing my routine. I put away all my photography equipment in a storage box and shoved it in the closet. For a few days, I avoided anything related to pictures. I didn't look at old albums, didn't scroll through my gallery, didn't even open social media apps where photos might appear. I wanted to see if that would make a difference. At first, I felt some relief. The random noises in my apartment got less frequent. I still felt on edge, but I wasn't seeing that shape in my daily life. After about a week, I tried one more experiment. I took one shot on my phone, just a picture of my living room. When I transferred it to my computer, the shape was right there in the corner, and it looked bigger. I stared at it, and it felt like it was looking back. My mouth tasted sour. My skin broke out in a cold sweat. I slammed my laptop shut and stepped away, my heart pounding in my ears. I realized then that it was waiting, growing, and that simply avoiding photography wasn't the answer. It might be feeding on my anxiety. It might be using any camera or reflective surface as a doorway. I started covering mirrors and turning off my phone camera. I even put tape over my laptop's webcam. I stopped going out at night. I kept the curtains drawn. My life turned into a routine of constant vigilance. I don't know how long I can keep living like this. I still have all my memory cards from that abandoned village. Part of me thinks I should destroy them. Part of me worries that it won't help. Maybe it's already anchored in my mind or in the digital space that floats around me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced that the shape is standing right next to my bed. I can feel my heart hammering against my ribcage. My breath comes in quick bursts. I turn on the lamp and there's nothing there. But I don't calm down. I can't. I can't say I have a plan. I'm just trying to get through each day without giving it more chances to appear. I wonder if returning to that village would do anything. Maybe I could confront it there or leave something behind. But I'm scared to go back. I'm worried that if I do, it'll move into the real world completely. For now, I'm just stuck with this shadow figure that lingers in every photo I take. It's more than a glitch. It's something alive, and it's chasing me through every image I capture. I'm not sure if I'll ever find a way to stop it. All I know is that once you open a door, you can't always close it. and I opened that door the moment I took those first pictures in that abandoned village. I still remember the exact time my headlights swept across that thing on the side of the road. It was just after midnight on a Tuesday. I was driving home from a friend's place, taking a rural back road because I wanted to avoid the highway construction. That's when I saw it. A scarecrow. It was on a wooden bench right off the shoulder facing the fields. I slowed down because I couldn't figure out why anyone would put a scarecrow on a bench. Then I noticed its head move. It wasn't a jerk or a twitch. It turned to look at me, slow and steady, as I passed by. My foot pressed harder on the gas. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I went home without stopping. That's how this started. That's when I began feeling like I'd stepped into something I couldn't explain. The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe I'd imagined it. I hadn't slept much the night before, and I'd had a stressful day at work, so I tried to convince myself it was just a weird moment of fatigue. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. I wanted to see the spot again in the daylight. I drove out there around 9 in the morning. The bench was still there, but it was empty. No sign of the scarecrow. I got out of my car and walked around. The grass on that shoulder was flat in one spot, like something large had been sitting there. I noticed footprints, but they were kind of strange. They were scattered and uneven, like two big feet trudging through the mud in different directions. They looked too big for most people's shoes. I bent down to get a closer look. They didn't look like boots. They were more like lumps pressed in the dirt, with rough outlines. I scanned the area. I saw rows of cornfields in the distance. There was a small dirt path leading between the fields, but I didn't see any people. A few crows circled overhead. The morning air was damp, and I could smell wet grass and old fertilizer. I tried to see if there were any more footprints leading away, but the ground got rocky past a certain point. I felt unsettled. Something about that bench and the flattening in the grass made my stomach tighten. I stood there a while, listening to my own breathing. Then I took a few pictures on my phone. They didn't show much detail, but I wanted something to prove to myself I wasn't going nuts. I left and went about my day, but I felt uneasy. My thoughts kept going back to that scarecrow and the way its head moved. I told myself over and over that it was probably a prank or some farmer's idea of a joke, but a small part of me knew it was more than that. Around 6 in the evening, I considered driving out there again, but decided to wait until it was fully dark. That might sound stupid, but I wanted to see if it would happen again. I needed to know if I'd really seen a moving scarecrow. Around 10, I got in my car and headed down the same road. It was cold outside, and I had the heat on low in the car. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. I passed empty farmland on either side. A few distant houses had their lights on, but the road itself was pitch black. My high beams lit up the asphalt in front of me, and everything else stayed in heavy darkness. I reached the stretch where I'd seen the bench. This time, there was no bench. There was no sign of anything unusual. My heart was pounding. My chest felt tight. I slowed down to a crawl. I rolled down my window. I heard crickets and the faint rustle of wind in the tall grass. I didn't see anything. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and got out. The sky was cloudy, so there was no moonlight. I used a flashlight to scan the shoulder. The bench was gone. The flattened grass was still there, but it looked less obvious than earlier that day. A chill settled in my stomach, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I stood there for about 5 minutes, shining my flashlight across the shoulder and the ditch. Nothing moved. I decided to walk back a few yards, thinking maybe the bench got moved down the road. I found nothing except patches of weeds and loose gravel. Then I heard a rustling sound behind me. I spun around. I felt my chest tighten. I shone the flashlight in that direction. I only saw the beam catching bits of grass and dirt, no sign of anything else. The rustling stopped. I realized my breathing was loud and shaky. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I felt like I was being watched, so I hurried back to my car and took off. All the way home, I kept checking my mirrors. I didn't see anything following me. For the next 2 days, I tried to push it out of my mind. I convinced myself it was probably someone messing with me, maybe a local with a sense of humor. But I still had this nagging sense that I was missing something. I started having trouble sleeping. Every night I'd lie in bed and imagine that scarecrow turning its head toward me. I'd see the shape of its shoulders, the straw sticking out of its sleeves, and that slow tilt of its head. I'd break into a sweat just thinking about it. On Thursday night, I drove home from work later than usual. It was around 11 when I hit that rural stretch again. I was trying not to look around too much. I wanted to get home and avoid the entire area, but part of me felt drawn to it. When I passed a broken fence on the right side of the road, my headlights illuminated something that made my stomach drop. There was that scarecrow again, only this time it was standing against a signpost. Its head was angled downward, like it was looking at the ground. I slowed down to see if it would move. As I got closer, I saw the head start to lift. I saw the face. It looked like a burlap sack with 2 dark spots for eyes. There was no mouth drawn on, just some black lines that could have been a stitched grin. It was hard to see. Then, the head tracked my car as I passed. I heard my breathing turn to rapid gasps. I pressed on the gas, not wanting to see anything else. I drove straight home, locked my doors, and sat in my living room with all the lights on. I felt shaky and on edge. Every time I heard a noise outside, a branch scraping the window, a car passing in the distance, I jumped. My heart was still racing hours later. I tried calling a friend to talk about it, but I hung up before I said anything. I felt stupid describing a scarecrow that moved. It sounded insane, like some campfire story. I sat there until about 2 in the morning just staring at the curtains. Eventually, I passed out on the couch. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. I kept replaying that moment when the scarecrow lifted its head. That night, I drove a different route home, even though it added 20 minutes to my trip. I thought maybe avoiding that road would help. But the moment I walked into my house, I felt uneasy again. Around midnight, I heard a car alarm outside. I peeked through the blinds. The alarm shut off and I saw nothing unusual. But my mind went straight to that scarecrow. Over the weekend, I tried to keep myself busy. I went into town, did my shopping, and stayed away from that stretch of highway. But Sunday night I had an urgent need to confirm it was still there. I told myself I wouldn't stop this time. I'd just drive by. Around 11 I got in my car. The road felt lonely. No other cars passed me. When I got close to the fence where I'd seen the scarecrow, I slowed down. At first I didn't see it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something in the field to the left. I braked and looked more closely. There it was, standing in the corn about 20 yards in. It faced the road. I couldn't see its features clearly, but I saw the faint outline of its hat and the old clothes it wore. I stared for a few seconds, and it didn't move. I wondered if it was even the same scarecrow. My skin crawled. I pressed the gas pedal and got out of there. I slept even worse that night. I kept picturing it in different spots around my house, waiting for me to look out the window. Every shadow made me jump. My shoulders felt tense all the time. By Monday, I decided to do a more thorough investigation. I drove out there just before sunset, hoping I could catch a glimpse of how it moved or who was moving it. I parked by an old barn about half a mile from where I'd seen it in the field. I walked along the edge of the corn, staying on a dirt path so I wouldn't get lost. The air smelled like soil and decaying leaves. The sun was low in the sky. I could see the outline of the barn behind me, and endless rows of corn on either side. After walking for 10 minutes, I saw a weathered wooden fence. It was the same fence near the signpost I'd passed earlier. I looked around. Nothing. No scarecrow. I felt uneasy. My palms were sweaty, and my throat felt dry. I started to retrace my steps, but then I spotted footprints in the dirt near the fence. They looked like the same big misshapen marks I'd seen before. I squatted down and tried to see if they led anywhere, but the trail vanished into the tall corn. That's when I heard movement deeper in the field. It sounded like someone brushing against the stalks. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my neck. I wanted to call out, but I didn't. I just listened. The noise stopped. I took a few steps back, keeping my eyes on the corn. I thought about shining a flashlight, but I left it in my car. Then I felt this wave of dread. I turned and jogged back to my vehicle. My mind was racing with the image of that scarecrow's face. The idea that it might be in the corn, watching me, made my chest tighten. By the time I reached my car, I was out of breath. My shirt was damp with sweat. I drove back home with my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. I had this persistent idea that the scarecrow wasn't just some trick. It felt like an entity that was aware of me. It was like it had singled me out, and I couldn't escape the thought that it somehow thrived on my fear. I tried to calm myself by turning on the radio, but I couldn't focus on the music. I kept replaying the sound in the corn. I got home, locked all my doors, and closed every curtain. I spent that night on the couch again, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Over the next few nights, I felt trapped in my own paranoia. I kept seeing shapes in my peripheral vision. I heard faint rustling outside whenever the wind blew. If I passed a row of scarecrows in a neighbor's field, my stomach twisted in knots. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to drive down that road one more time. I needed to see if it would appear again. It was close to midnight. The road was dark, with only a few reflectors on the side. I passed the first stretch of farmland, then the broken fence. After a few more yards, I spotted the bench again. It was back in its original spot, right on the shoulder. My headlights illuminated the back of that scarecrow, sitting there like it had that first night. I slowed down, rolling by at a crawl. My heart slammed in my chest. I swallowed hard. Then, just like before, it turned its head. It looked right at me. I saw that burlap face, the empty eye spots. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I haven't driven that route since. I avoid going near those fields. I still think about it, though. Every time I recall the way it moved, my arms break out in goosebumps. I wonder if someone else has seen it. I wonder if it shows up for people who aren't afraid, or if it only targets those who can't help feeling scared. I've thought about telling the local authorities, but I don't have any proof that there's a real person behind this. I haven't told many friends because they'd think I'm out of my mind. But deep down, I believe that thing is more than a stuffed dummy. I can't prove it, but I feel it. Whenever I drive late at night on other rural roads, I'm always checking the shoulders, looking for a bench, looking for any sign of that damn burlap head. I don't sleep well these days. My dreams are full of images of that motionless figure waiting for me in dark fields. It's a silent fear that seeps into everything I do. I still feel the tension in my neck and shoulders, and sometimes I wake up sweating after hearing what I think is straw scraping against wood. I keep my phone charged with the camera ready, but a part of me doesn't want to catch it on film. Another part of me wants to prove I'm not delusional. Either way, I try to avoid that entire area at night now. I'd rather not see it again, but I know it's out there, somewhere, waiting for me or for anyone who dares to pass by after midnight. And if they're like me, tired and scared, maybe it watches them too, turning that burlap face just enough to feed on every ounce of fear they have left. So that's the story. No fancy explanations, no heroic ending. It's just something I lived through. And to be honest, I don't think it's over. Every night I lock my doors, I get this nagging thought that it might find its way into my yard or show up outside my window. If that happens, I'm not sure what I'd do. For now, I keep my curtains closed and my lights on, and I stay away from that back road after dark. That's the only way I can keep myself from going nuts. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It gets under your skin. And you can't shake the feeling that it's always looking for you, ready to turn its head and remind you that it's still there, soaking up your fear in the silence of the night. I still remember how the dust tasted in my mouth when I first pulled down that old sheet. The attic felt cramped, and the single light bulb on the ceiling made everything look gray and lifeless. I'd been spending the entire afternoon rummaging through boxes and moving furniture, hoping to help my parents clear out what they no longer needed. I thought I'd find some old photo albums or maybe a record player. Instead, I found this tall, oval-shaped mirror with wooden edges that felt rough under my fingertips. The sheet over it was thick and coated in a heavy layer of dust. When I tugged it free, I coughed and tried to wave the dust away. Then I looked straight at the glass. That's when I noticed something was off. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or maybe my eyes playing a game on me. I raised my right hand, but in the mirror, I saw someone moving slightly out of sync. I leaned in, squinting. The figure looked like me in every detail, but the movements were delayed by a fraction of a second. It wasn't a normal reflection. I shook my head and tried again, lifting my foot, turning my head, blinking. Each time the timing seemed out of place, like a video lagging behind. I felt my stomach tighten. The feeling was like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if the ground was stable. I stepped away, pretending it was just my imagination. I lowered the sheet onto the floor and looked around the attic, trying to ground myself. The place smelled of mothballs and old paper. I could see dust floating in the weak light. My throat felt dry. I told myself that maybe I was tired from lifting old furniture. Maybe the flickering light bulb was messing with my eyes. I went back to sorting boxes, deliberately not looking at the mirror for a while. But every so often, my eyes drifted to it. It stood upright against the wall, angled just enough for me to catch a glimpse of my shape if I turned my head. Each glance made me uneasy. Sometimes, I thought I saw a slight difference in the background reflected in the glass, like a different corner of a room or some shadow that didn't belong. After half an hour, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked back over, determined to look at it closely. I stood right in front of the mirror. The wood frame had dark patterns carved into it, but most were hidden under decades of grime. I touched one of the carved lines, and my finger came away gray with dust. Then I looked at my reflection. I raised my left hand this time, very slowly. The figure in the mirror lifted its left hand, but it was late by half a second, maybe less. Still, I could see the delay. My pulse sped up. I rubbed my eyes and tried again. The same thing happened. I forced a laugh, but it sounded shaky. I brushed it off, telling myself I'd been staring too hard and needed a break. I covered the mirror again, deciding I'd tell my parents about it later. I wanted to keep working, but I felt a strange pull. It was hard to look away from something so bizarre. Each time I turned my back, I sensed a presence behind me. I'd spin around, half expecting to see the sheet move or the glass catch some reflection of something else. But it never happened when I looked. The air in the attic felt heavier. My shirt started to stick to my back because I was sweating for no apparent reason. I ended up leaving the attic earlier than planned. I told my parents I was done for the day, that I needed a shower. They didn't think much of it. They just thanked me for the help and said we could continue the following weekend. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. Even in the shower, with hot water hitting my shoulders, the memory of that delayed reflection replayed in my head. That night, I stayed in my old bedroom. It's on the second floor, below the attic. Around midnight, I was lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. I was restless. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps on the floor above me. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was pacing back and forth. At first, I thought it might be my dad grabbing something from the attic, but I remembered how late it was and he rarely went up there after dark. I got out of bed, walked to the hallway, and listened. The house was quiet, except for that soft creaking from above. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. I reached for the attic door, but I hesitated. The steps stopped. Everything went silent. I told myself I was just spooked because of the mirror incident. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Maybe 30 minutes later, there came another noise, a rhythmic tapping, almost like someone was knocking on glass. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for me to hear. That was when I really felt my chest tighten. In the morning, I went upstairs and found everything just as I'd left it. The sheet was still draped over the mirror. Nothing looked moved. The attic was quiet. I lifted the sheet and peeked at the glass. My reflection stared back at me. I didn't see any lag this time. I waved my hand just to check. It moved in sync. I let out a breath, relieved but still uneasy. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about it. The footsteps and tapping sounds at night seemed to continue, though never as loud as the first time. Sometimes I'd hear just one knock, sometimes two. My sleep got worse. I started waking up drenched in sweat, heart racing. I couldn't explain why I felt so anxious, but it was impossible to shake off. I decided to do some digging. My parents own a lot of old books and records in a storage cabinet near the kitchen. I searched through them, looking for any mention of the mirror or how it ended up in our attic. Eventually, I found a small journal wrapped in a torn cloth cover. It belonged to my grandfather. Most entries were about day-to-day life. But then I stumbled on a short note that caught my attention. It mentioned a mirror with a strange reflection. My grandfather wrote that he felt drawn to it, that something behind the glass felt alive. He warned that he'd read about people who stared too long into it, then went missing. That was all. No explanation about who these people were or what the final outcome was. Just, they disappeared, and no one heard from them again. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My hands felt clammy. My grandfather had never talked about anything like this with me. He passed away years ago, but I remember him as a practical man. He never told ghost stories or mentioned anything supernatural. To see this note in his handwriting made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I went back to the attic that same afternoon. I wanted to study the mirror in daylight, with the sun shining through the small window. I pulled the sheet off completely. The surface of the mirror looked flawless despite its age. There were no scratches or cracks. The wooden frame was solid, though the carving looked worn. I stood there, just watching my reflection. I stared at it for a while, trying to see if it would move out of sync again. At one point, I leaned in so close my nose almost touched the glass. I could see every detail of my face, the lines around my eyes, the faint stubble on my chin, the tired look in my eyes. Then a small movement caught my attention in the background of the reflection. It was like a shadow passing by, but not on my side. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me except boxes and old furniture. When I turned back, the shadow was gone. My heart started pounding. I heard a ringing in my ears. I pulled away and sat on a wooden chest for a moment, trying to calm down. That night, I heard the tapping again. It seemed louder. The pacing steps returned, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline each time the floor creaked. Around 2 a.m., I decided enough was enough. I got out of bed, threw on some clothes, and grabbed the flashlight from my desk drawer. I headed up to the attic, steps shaky on the creaking stairs. My breath felt short, and my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened the attic door, shining the flashlight around. Everything was still, but I felt a sense of presence I can't quite explain. I walked over to the mirror. The sheet was lying folded next to it, though I distinctly remember leaving the sheet on top of it earlier that day. My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard, then raised the flashlight to the mirror. The reflection showed me standing there, flashlight in one hand, the other hand clenched into a fist at my side. But there was a faint difference in the backdrop behind my reflection. It looked like a different attic, similar shape, but the boxes and furniture were arranged in another pattern. I could make out something like a heavy wooden trunk behind my reflection's shoulder, though I don't have a trunk like that in our attic. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it. Then my reflection took a step closer to the glass, but my actual foot never moved. I felt my breath catch. My chest got tight. I stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight. The reflection stared at me. It was me, but it wasn't me. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stood there trying to force my body to move, but my muscles felt weak. After what might have been seconds or minutes, the reflection raised its hand and pressed it flat against the inside of the mirror, like someone pressing a hand against a window. For some reason, the air in the attic felt colder. I shook my head and fought the urge to do the same. I gripped the flashlight until my knuckles ached. Then I backed away, never turning my back on that glass until I reached the attic door. I hurried down the stairs, breathing hard. I could hear my heart pounding. I shut the door and locked it from the outside, something I'd never done before. My hands were trembling. I barely slept the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection pressing its hand against the glass. The next day, I told my parents I needed to find out more about that mirror. They seemed surprised. They said they didn't know much, only that it came from some distant relative's estate years ago. No one really talked about it. I decided to visit the local historical society. They have old newspapers, property records, and sometimes personal letters donated by families in the area. I spent hours looking for any mention of a mirror that might match the description. Eventually, I found a brief article from decades ago. It referenced rumors of a cursed mirror that caused odd reflections and strange noises. The article was vague, but it quoted a local man who claimed that a few of his acquaintances seemed to vanish after obsessively watching themselves in the mirror. The man insisted they weren't running away. They left behind belongings and gave no notice. They just disappeared one day. There was no mention of bodies or murders, just the phrase, "gone without a trace." I left the historical society with a knot in my stomach. I considered getting rid of the mirror, but I was afraid. What if breaking it made something worse happen? I also felt a pull, like I needed to look at it again. Each night I kept hearing footsteps and tapping. Sometimes it sounded like faint scratching on the other side of the mirror. I tried to ignore it, turning up the volume on my headphones or burying my head in my pillow. On the fifth night, I woke around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. My heart was racing and the house was silent. I stayed in bed, listening. Nothing moved. Then I felt an intense urge to see the mirror. I can't explain it. It was like a hunger. My throat felt dry and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to go upstairs. My mind screamed at me not to go, but my body was already moving. I got out of bed and headed toward the attic door. My steps were slow and each one felt like a struggle. When I opened the attic door, I could feel a slight breeze. I don't know where it came from. There are no windows open in the attic. The sheet was on the floor, crumpled. The mirror stood in the corner. The flashlight lay where I'd dropped it the previous night. My reflection was there, perfectly matching my movements again. I stepped closer, and the boards creaked under my feet. My stomach twisted. My muscles felt tense, like I was ready to run, but I kept going. I stared at the mirror. The reflection stared back. I was relieved to see everything moving in sync. Then I saw a flicker of something behind my reflection. A shape, maybe a person, moved quickly across the background. My reflection didn't react. I reached out to touch the mirror. The glass felt cold against my fingertips. My reflection did the same, but the background behind my reflection stayed different. The trunk I'd seen was still there in the reflection's attic, along with other objects I couldn't quite make out. My breath came in short gasps. My heart hammered in my chest. Then I heard a quiet tapping from the inside of the glass. I jerked my hand away, almost losing my balance. The reflection stayed there, pressing its fingers to the inside as if it was trying to call me in. I felt a wave of dizziness. My legs shook. I forced myself to take a step back. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I don't know how long I stood there staring. My mind felt stuck, like I was caught between running away and stepping closer. Finally, I managed to tear my gaze away from the mirror. I grabbed the sheet and tossed it over the frame. Then I backed out of the attic. I slammed the door and locked it again. Sweat dripped down my forehead and my hands were shaky. Since then, I've tried to keep myself busy, focusing on anything that doesn't involve that mirror, but I still feel it pulling at me. I walk past the attic door and feel an urge to go upstairs, to uncover it and see if the reflection has changed. My grandfather's note keeps echoing in my head. They disappeared, and no one heard from them again. I'm desperate not to be one of those people. I'm fighting that urge with everything I have. Sometimes it's easier. Sometimes it's almost unbearable. Each night the footsteps and tapping come back, soft and steady, reminding me it's there, waiting. I haven't told anyone else. My parents wouldn't believe me, and I'm not sure what they could do if they did. I feel stuck with it. I have a sinking feeling that I won't be able to avoid this forever. I try not to look in mirrors in general now. Any reflection sets my teeth on edge. I keep telling myself that if I ignore it long enough, it will stop, but I don't believe that anymore. I don't know what my next move is. Part of me wants to yank that mirror outside and smash it into a million pieces, but I'm afraid that might trigger something worse. Maybe it wouldn't even break. I keep thinking about that reflection moving on its own, pressing its hand against the glass. That memory won't go away. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. My body tenses up and my breath hitches. My thoughts race with images of me inside that glass, stuck in some other place. For now, the mirror is still in the attic, under that sheet. My biggest fear is that on some restless night, my curiosity or that strange force I feel will lure me back. I can't say it won't happen. I'm gripping onto my self-control every time I hear those quiet knocks on the glass. Every time my reflection doesn't match my movement. Every time I sense something behind me when I stand in front of it. I'm writing this down in case I start to lose my grip. I keep reminding myself, I have to resist. I can't let that mirror pull me in. If it does, I might never come out. I don't want to be the next person who just disappears, leaving behind nothing but questions. But the mirror doesn't care what I want. It's just there, waiting, with that silent promise of something beyond the glass. And deep down, that's what scares me the most. Something scratched against the shop's front door last night around midnight. I was in the back room checking an old lamp for dents when I heard it. The noise was quiet but urgent, like a small claw tapping the wood. I froze, holding my breath. Nobody visits my antique store that late. I thought maybe it was a branch in the wind, but the night was calm. My gut told me something was off. I set the lamp down, went to the door, and looked through the glass. I saw nothing. That was the moment I realized my peaceful life was slipping away, and I had no idea what waited for me in the darkness. My name is Nathan. I run this antique shop on a quiet street near the edge of town. I've always liked old objects, especially ones with some history. I never expected anything dangerous. I took this job for peace, not for mystery. But ever since I received a new shipment of dusty items from an estate sale 2 weeks ago, I felt uneasy. The items came in 3 wooden crates. Most of them were typical: candlesticks, vases, some old tools. But there was one box, half buried in the 3rd crate, that looked different. It was a small trunk, maybe 2 feet wide, made of dark wood. The metal hinges were rusty, and there was a heavy lock at the front, corroded and stuck. At first glance, it was just another old storage box, but something about it felt wrong. I carried the trunk down to the basement because it was in bad shape. The wood was chipped and the top had deep scratches. I didn't think much of it until I tried to open it out of curiosity. The lock wouldn't budge. I tried a few keys from the shop's collection, but none of them fit. I tried tapping the lock with a small hammer, but it stayed locked. It was stuck tight, and I decided to leave it alone until I had the patience to look for a proper tool. A couple of days passed without major incidents, though I started to notice odd details. Some items on the shelves weren't where I left them. Price tags got swapped. The small display of teacups near the door ended up on another table one morning. I thought maybe I was forgetting where I put things. I'm not that organized, so I tried not to worry. But then the lights began flickering at night. I'd flip the switch, and sometimes it took a few seconds before the overhead lights stayed on. I replaced the bulbs, but the issue continued. I called an electrician who checked everything and said it was fine. I felt my stomach twist with each flicker. It made the shadows move in the corners, and I started jumping at the slightest sound. One evening, I was finishing some paperwork in the small office behind the main showroom. I heard a loud crash in the next room. My heart pounded as I rushed out. I found a porcelain statue on the ground, shattered. It had been on a locked shelf, and there was no sign of a break-in. The shelf's glass door was wide open, but the lock wasn't broken. That made no sense. I couldn't figure out how the statue fell. The next night, I heard footsteps in the corridor. I checked every corner of the shop but found no one. The doors were locked, and the windows were shut. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The corridor felt cold, and I noticed a strange odor. It was like damp wood, mixed with old paper and a hint of something rotten. It reminded me of the trunk in the basement, and my pulse quickened. I decided to go down to the basement to make sure no one was hiding there. The basement is dark, even with the lights on. The walls are concrete, and there's a single long corridor that leads to my storage area. My steps echoed on the concrete floor, and I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt eyes on me, but I saw nothing. When I reached the storage room, the trunk was in the corner where I left it. Nothing else looked disturbed. I approached the trunk and crouched down. That rotten smell was stronger. The lock still looked the same, all rusted. I got a weird urge to open it again, but I hesitated. My skin tingled, and my hands started trembling. I felt like something was standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I told myself it was just nerves. I forced a laugh and left the basement, locking it behind me. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the footsteps in the corridor, the shattered statue, the cold sensation against my neck. The next morning, I tried to distract myself by polishing a set of silverware, but every clink against the tray made me jump. Then I heard a whisper. It was so soft I almost missed it. It seemed to float across the room, and I couldn't catch the exact words. I set the silverware down and strained my ears. Nothing. I paced around, feeling my heart beat in my chest. My mouth was dry. I kept looking at the door to the basement, expecting it to open on its own. Over the next few days, the disturbances got worse. I heard more whispers. At times, I felt a breeze pass me in the hallway, even though no windows were open. Small objects kept falling off shelves. I started seeing fleeting shapes out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned my head, nothing was there. My forehead itched with sweat, even though the shop was cool. I tried leaving the lights on all night, but they flickered at random times. Twice I found items stacked in odd places, as if someone was rearranging them just to confuse me. I had trouble focusing on my work. I considered closing the shop for a few days, but that would cut off my income. I reasoned that I just needed to figure out what was happening. Then I made a decision. I had to open that trunk. Everything pointed back to it. I grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight one afternoon and went to the basement. I kneeled in front of the trunk and tried to wedge the crowbar under the lock. My hands were shaking, and I had trouble keeping a firm grip. I pressed down and the lock shifted, but it stayed in place. The trunk didn't open. I felt a rush of hot air against my cheek, and I heard a series of soft whispers behind me. My muscles froze. My heart pounded against my ribs. I dropped the crowbar and spun around, shining the flashlight. The room was still empty. The shadows in the corners looked deeper, though. I stood there, panting, listening for any hint of movement. The whispers faded. I glanced back at the trunk. The smell of decay was so thick that my stomach flipped. I couldn't stay in that basement any longer. I grabbed the crowbar and left. That night, I moved a spare cot into the showroom because I didn't want to be alone in the back office. I figured that if something strange happened, maybe I'd catch it. I dozed off around midnight. I woke to a sudden crash near the front door. My eyes shot open, and I sat up on the cot, feeling my pulse race. The overhead lights flickered. I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked toward the sound. My legs felt heavy. When I reached the front door, I saw a display case open and several small figurines on the floor. They weren't broken, just placed in a line, as if someone arranged them carefully. I stared at them, unable to move. It felt like a mockery, like something was telling me it could do whatever it wanted. I bent down to pick them up, my hand trembling. Then the main lights went out. Pitch black. My breathing turned shallow. I switched on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the shop. Shadows jumped on the walls. I heard a soft chuckle. Or maybe just the sound of a creaking floorboard. It came from somewhere near the center of the store. I called out, asking if someone was there. No response. I had goosebumps all over my arms. I felt a drop of sweat roll down my temple. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and moved slowly, shining the light between furniture. Nothing. No footprints, no one hiding. I returned to the cot, trying to calm my nerves. My heart was hammering and my lungs felt tight. I realized I wasn't going to sleep again that night. The next morning, I confronted the trunk again. I was tired of being afraid. I brought down a bolt cutter, a hammer, and another flashlight. I decided that if I had to pry the trunk apart, I would. The basement smelled stale. My footsteps echoed. I was alone, but my skin prickled as if unseen eyes were watching. I kneeled next to the trunk, took a deep breath, and tried the bolt cutter on the lock. The metal squealed, and I felt the lock shift slightly. Then I gave it another squeeze, and the lock snapped. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. My breathing quickened. I set the broken lock aside, placed my fingertips under the lid, and pushed upward. It didn't move. I tried again. Still nothing. I realized the trunk must have another latch inside, or maybe the wood was swollen. I switched tactics and wedged the crowbar under the lid near the hinges. I pressed down and the trunk groaned. The wood creaked. A wave of stale air hit me in the face. The rotten stench was intense, stronger than before. I gagged and almost dropped the crowbar. I forced the lid up another inch, then another. Suddenly, the trunk slammed shut on its own. My wrist slammed against the crowbar, and the flashlight fell to the ground. I cursed, rubbing my wrist. The trunk stayed closed as if nothing had happened. My heart pounded. I felt my throat tighten. A sudden breeze rushed through the basement, blowing dust into my eyes. I squinted, coughing. I could taste the dirt in my mouth. The overhead light flickered, casting jagged shadows on the walls. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I clenched the crowbar and turned, but the corridor was empty. I shined the flashlight around, but the beam shook in my trembling hand. My lungs burned with each breath. I turned back to the trunk and tried to shove the crowbar in again, but my hand felt numb. A voice whispered my name, right behind me. Nathan. It was so close I could feel the warmth of breath on my ear. I jumped up, stumbling backward. My heart felt like it would burst. I dropped the crowbar. I ran up the stairs, leaving the trunk half pried open. I locked the basement door and leaned against it, panting. My shirt was soaked in sweat. My neck muscles were stiff. My head spun with exhaustion. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the basement. Every time I thought about going back down, my stomach twisted. My mind replayed the trunk slamming shut on my wrist, the voice whispering my name, the footsteps. I realized I was dealing with something beyond normal explanations. I had no plan. I felt cornered. When night came, I tried to calm myself by cleaning the front counter. I turned on some music to break the silence, but my mind kept wandering. I jumped at every little sound. Around midnight, the music stopped. The stereo turned off by itself. Then the lights in the showroom blinked once, twice, and stayed on. I waited, my heart thumping, half expecting them to go dark again. Then the power went out completely, plunging the shop into darkness. I scrambled for a flashlight. My fingers fumbled on the counter. In the silent dark, I could hear my own breathing, sharp and quick. I flicked the flashlight on and aimed it at the open doorway leading to the back hall. I saw nothing. Still, I felt something in the air, like static. My skin tingled. Then I heard scraping sounds from the basement door as if nails were dragging along the wood. My knees felt weak. My palms were damp. I wanted to run outside, but a part of me refused to leave the shop unguarded. I gripped the flashlight and took a few steps toward the back hall. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. Every hair on my body stood on end. The scraping continued, soft but insistent. I reached the door, touched the handle, and felt a vibration, like someone pushing against the other side. My hand jerked away. My pulse hammered in my ears. I heard a short burst of whispered voices, then silence. I couldn't bring myself to open that door. I stumbled back to the showroom, found a corner, and sat with my back to the wall, flashlight pointed at the hall. I stayed there, legs pulled close to my chest, until the faint morning light seeped through the windows. My mind raced all night with images of that trunk and the thing inside it. Maybe it was summoned by those mysterious antiques, or maybe it had always been there, waiting for someone stupid enough to pry open its prison. I have no idea. I'm not sure I ever want to find out. When the sun rose, I finally stood up. My back hurt and my head throbbed from lack of sleep. The shop looked normal in daylight, but I knew it was just a facade. I could still smell that faint, rotten odor. It clung to my clothes and lingered in the corners. I walked to the basement door. I touched it, feeling that same vibration. I stepped back, my heart racing again. I realized I had reached my limit. I grabbed my keys, left the store, and locked the door behind me. I'm not sure what comes next. All I know is that trunk is down there, half open, and something waits inside. For now, I can't face it. The antique shop stands in silence, hiding that locked box in the basement. At this moment, I'm exhausted and frightened. I want to sleep in my own bed, in my own home, but I can't stop thinking about what's in that trunk. Tonight, I'll try to rest. Tomorrow, I might return, or I might list the shop for sale. I haven't decided yet. I just know that when I close my eyes, I see that trunk and hear those whispers. They're whispering my name, telling me I'll never truly leave. And I'm afraid they're right. I never imagined I would feel a jolt of panic at a simple knock on my front door. I never considered that a quiet neighborhood like mine could host anything strange. But about a month ago, things changed. Now I wait for that sound at around 3 in the morning. I can't sleep properly, I can't think of anything else. I just wait in the dark with my eyes pinned on the clock, feeling a tightening in my chest. Every night it happens at the exact same minute. 3 sharp knocks. No one is ever there when I look through the peephole or check my security cameras. But I feel it. Something is right outside. Something is pushing against the door, waiting for me to open it. I keep telling myself I'm being irrational, but I can't deny the cold sweat on my forehead and the trembling in my hands. It's not just my mind playing tricks on me. It's something real. I live alone in a small house on a quiet street. There's a small yard in front, a few potted plants, and a short path leading to the sidewalk. The streetlights are dim at night, but they usually give me enough illumination to see if anyone's around. I've checked my cameras every morning since the knocking started. There's never any sign of movement or even a shadow. The logs don't show any glitch, the cameras don't skip any frames. Everything seems normal, but night after night, I hear it. 3 knocks, then silence. The first few times I stayed in bed, stiff and alert. I waited, thinking maybe I was dreaming, but the knocking sounded too real. It was a dull, heavy sound, like someone's knuckles against wood. I'd get up, my heart pounding, and check my peephole. Nothing. I'd open the door a crack. No one. My porch light would reveal only my doormat and the edges of my driveway. The air would feel a bit cold, but that was it. Nothing else. So for the first week, I tried to ignore it. I assumed there might be an animal brushing against the door or some random pipe-making noise. But my gut kept telling me otherwise. On the 8th or 9th night, I became determined to catch the source. I sat on the couch in my living room with all the lights off. I had my phone in my hand. The time on the screen showed 2:59 a.m. I waited, keeping my eyes on the door. My legs felt tense. My throat felt dry. My chest felt tight. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It seemed to echo through the room. I jumped up and ran to the door. I pressed my eye against the peephole. No shape, no movement. I flicked the lock, yanked the door open, and stepped onto the porch. There was a rush of cold air that made me shiver. I felt goosebumps on my arms. The porch light flickered for a second, and then I saw a faint outline in front of me. It was like a thin, see-through form that wavered in the air. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. After maybe 2 seconds, it faded. The light returned to normal. I blinked, struggling to process what I had just seen. I closed the door and stood in my living room for a while, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt a dull ache in my chest. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and gripped the edges of the sink. My reflection showed a man with wide eyes and tense shoulders. I remember muttering to myself, "What the hell was that?" I tried to recall every detail, but it had happened so fast. All I knew was that I saw something there, and it wasn't a trick of the light. It felt like a presence, not just a weird reflection or a patch of fog. The next few nights I followed the same routine. I stayed up late. I watched the door, counted down the minutes, and waited. The knocks kept coming. They were always exactly at 3 a.m. I'd open the door at once. Each time, that freezing gust of wind blew in. Each time the light flickered, and each time I saw that almost transparent silhouette for a few seconds. I couldn't make out any face or clothing. It was just a shape, like a faint shadow of a person standing in front of me. My hands would shake, my stomach would churn, and then, just as quickly, it would vanish. As the nights went on, I started noticing other changes in my house. The temperature in the living room felt lower than the rest of the rooms, even when I turned the heat up. Sometimes I'd hear a soft hum or vibration coming from the walls around 3 a.m., like something was resonating within the house. My alarm clock would glitch, showing 3 a.m. for a full minute and then jumping to 3:02 a.m. My phone, which I used to record or take pictures, never captured anything unusual. It was like the camera froze whenever that figure appeared. I'd play back the videos and there would be a short skip in the footage, always at the moment of the knocking. No matter what I tried, I couldn't document the presence, but I kept feeling it. My sleep schedule was a mess. I'd find myself dozing off around 4 or 5 in the morning after the adrenaline wore off. Then I'd wake up midday for work, feeling groggy and paranoid. During the day, I'd try to distract myself, but my mind would always come back to that shape. I'd wonder if it was just some bizarre phenomenon or if something else was happening. My eyes would drift to the front door at odd times, expecting a sudden knock. Every time I drove home from work, I'd feel a sense of dread pulling me toward the house. After about 2 weeks of this routine, the presence felt stronger. The knocks grew louder. The vibrations in the walls started to feel more violent. There were times I noticed slight flickers in the overhead lights throughout the evening, like small warnings leading up to the main event at 3 a.m. I found myself pacing around my living room at night, wondering if I should stay or check into a motel. But I kept telling myself I needed to face this. I wanted to know what it was. I also felt a strange pull, like something about it wanted me to be there. One night, I decided to open the door a little before the knocks. I thought if I swung it open at 2:59 a.m., maybe I'd catch the figure off guard. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, watching the clock on my phone. The moment it turned 2:59 a.m., I yanked the door open and stepped outside. My porch light flickered, then stayed on. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I felt a slight breeze, but it wasn't freezing. I sighed, thinking maybe that was the night it didn't happen. Then I heard the knocks, but they came from behind me. I spun around, facing the open doorway. My heart raced. The knocks continued, knock, 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 on the inside of my door, the door that I had just opened. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My stomach twisted. I stepped backward, holding the knob with a tight grip. The knock sounded dull, as if a fist was hitting the wood from inside the house. The moment I looked into the doorway, the shape appeared in the threshold, shimmering slightly. It was inside my living room now. I could see it standing there, no eyes, no mouth, just a vague human outline. I stopped breathing for a second. Then it vanished. The light on my porch flickered again. I stumbled inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I could barely stand. My legs felt weak. My chest hurt from my rapid heartbeat. I spent the rest of that night checking my windows and doors. I switched on every light in the house. The living room felt cold, like an air conditioner was blasting, but it was the middle of the night in early summer. My thermostat read an unchanging temperature, but I could see my breath. I could hear a low humming sound coming from the walls. My arms were covered in goosebumps and my teeth chattered. I paced around for a while, then grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch, staring at the front door. The blanket did nothing to warm me up. My thoughts raced. I couldn't make sense of any of it, but I knew that thing was becoming more aggressive. The next day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. My boss asked if I was feeling sick. I just nodded, gave some excuse, and tried to push through the day. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My hands kept shaking whenever I thought about going home that night. By the time I clocked out, I felt a dull headache pulsing behind my eyes. I considered staying at a friend's place, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what was happening. It sounded too unreal. I didn't want to be laughed at, and I didn't want to involve anyone else in my problem. That evening, I prepared myself. I took a quick shower, ate a light dinner, then set up a chair in my living room near the door. I placed a flashlight on the coffee table. I also kept my phone nearby, though I knew it wouldn't capture anything. By midnight, my heart rate was already elevated. I could feel it thumping in my chest. I tried to keep the TV on for background noise, but it only made me more tense. I kept glancing at the door. The faint vibration in the walls started around 2:45 a.m. It felt like a low-frequency hum that made the floor vibrate under my feet. I stood up, walked to the door, and waited. Right at 3 a.m. The knocks exploded against the wood, louder than before, each one making the door shake in its frame. My breath caught in my throat. I flung the door open. The cold blast of air hit me so hard it almost took my breath away. My eyes watered from the sudden chill. I saw the silhouette standing on the other side of the threshold. It seemed more defined this time, like I could almost see the curve of a shoulder, the suggestion of arms at its sides. I held my breath. My heart pounded in my chest and my hands started to sweat. Then it stepped forward. I can't say I heard footsteps because there was no sound of feet on the concrete, but the shape moved closer. My gut twisted. I took a few steps back, but I kept my eyes on it. My mind screamed at me to do something, but I was frozen. Then, just as quickly as it came, it flickered out of sight. I slammed the door again and locked it. I noticed my hands shaking uncontrollably. My legs felt weak. I sat down on the couch trying to steady my breathing. My living room stayed cold. The lights flickered on and off once or twice, but they settled after a moment. My phone read 3:02 a.m. I told myself I was losing my grip on reality, but the physical reactions were too real to ignore. I had bruises forming on my hands from gripping the doorknob so hard. The door itself had faint scratch marks, like something had dragged nails or a sharp object across the surface. I ran my fingers over them. They felt rough, fresh. For the next several nights, the pattern continued. I'd hear the knocking, always at the same time. I'd open the door, trying to challenge it, or sometimes I'd wait a moment, hoping it would stop. But it never did. The figure would appear. It grew more defined each night, as if it was gathering strength. The cold got worse, and the house felt almost uninhabitable in the early morning hours. I started wearing heavy clothes to bed, even though it was still warm outside. My phone and electronics continued to malfunction whenever the knocks occurred. The recordings always showed static or no signal at the moment of the figure's appearance. One night, I thought I heard a faint whisper along with the knocks. It sounded like a low moan or sigh, but I couldn't make out any words. It was enough to send fresh waves of fear through my body. My hands trembled, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I stood there at the door, flashlight in hand, shining the beam into the empty space on my porch. The silhouette materialized, and for the first time, I saw a slight movement like it was reaching out toward me. Its form flickered like a weak signal on a TV screen. Then, in an instant, it vanished again. I dropped my flashlight, and it clattered on the concrete steps. I swore under my breath, picked it up, and retreated inside. My heart hammered. I locked everything up and leaned against the wall, feeling my shirt sticking to my back with sweat. As the third week wore on, I reached a point of exhaustion. I was running out of ways to handle the fear. I rarely slept. and I felt jumpy at every little sound. My eyes were bloodshot in the mirror each morning, and my face looked drawn. But a strange part of me wanted to see this thing come fully into my home, just so I could face it, whatever it was. My rational side knew that was dangerous and probably stupid, but I was tired of living in a state of constant tension. I wanted an answer. On the 20th night, I heard the knocks as usual. I opened the door, and the silhouette was already there. It filled the doorway. This time, the lights in my house started to flicker wildly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The vibration in the floor felt like a small quake. I held the doorknob with both hands, my knuckles turning white. The shape stayed there, not fading. I saw an outline of what could have been a face, though there were no features, just a suggestion of hollows where eyes might be. I felt a surge of panic in my chest, like my heart was about to burst. My breaths came in rapid, shallow gasps. My thoughts spun in circles, but all I could manage was to stand there, focusing on staying upright. The entity lingered for what felt like several seconds. My stomach twisted, and my entire body felt cold. My knees threatened to give out under me. Then the silhouette flickered and disappeared. The lights returned to normal. The floor stopped vibrating. I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to slow my racing heart. The adrenaline pulsed in my veins, and I felt an ache in my temples. I slammed the door shut and double-locked it. Now, as I record this experience in my own words, I'm preparing for the next confrontation. I know it's going to happen again tonight, right at 3 a.m. There's no doubt in my mind that this presence is gaining strength each time it appears. My house no longer feels like my own. My living room is an icebox after midnight. I keep hearing a faint rumble behind the walls, like an engine running somewhere deep in the foundation. I can see the scratches on my door growing more pronounced. I have nightmares about them. I hear the knocks in my dreams, and when I wake up, I'm drenched in sweat, my throat dry. I'm sure that soon it will fully appear. I'm sure it has some intention, I can sense it. The tension in the air is undeniable. I've stopped trying to explain this to anyone. I know they'd say I'm just dealing with stress or that my mind is inventing things. But the physical evidence is there. I feel it in the drop of temperature. I see it in the flickering lights. I hear it in the heavy knocks that echo in my ears. My body responds with shaking limbs, shallow breath, and constant anxiety. There's nothing imaginary about the chills that pierce my skin every night. It's almost 2 a.m. now. I'm sitting on the couch, typing these words on my phone. The living room is dimly lit by a single floor lamp. My body feels tense, and I'm wearing a thick hoodie even though the temperature outside is in the 70s. I can't shake this dread, but I can't run from it either. I'm waiting for the knocks. I know they'll come, and when they do, I'll open the door again. I have no idea what will happen tonight. I feel like this thing is right on the edge of a complete manifestation. The air in here feels charged, like standing under high-voltage lines. My ears keep picking up faint humming noises from the corners of the room. The clock on my phone is ticking closer to 3 a.m. I'm going to face it again, no matter how much my muscles tense and my heart pounds. I'll grip the doorknob and fling it open. I'll feel that freezing wind hit me in the face. I'll see that silhouette, maybe more solid than ever before. I might feel it push past me, or I might see it stand there, blocking my entrance. I don't know what it wants, but I sense it's not going to stop until it shows itself completely. And that's what scares me the most. I have no idea what it plans to do once it can fully step inside. But I don't see any other option except to face it, because ignoring it or running away hasn't done me any good. I'm sitting here in the cold, watching my breath in front of me. I'm counting the minutes. My legs are shaking and my palms are sweaty. Every small noise from outside makes me jump. I keep waiting for my phone screen to freeze, for the power to flicker again. I can see the reflection of my anxious face in the dark TV screen. My eyes look tired. My skin looks pale. My mind feels like a coiled spring. I check the time, 2:59 a.m. I stand up. My knees feel unsteady. I move toward the door, my heart pounding. My hand hovers over the knob. My breath comes in shallow bursts. Then 3 knocks. I grip the knob and yank the door open. Cold air slams into me. The shape is right there, almost filling the doorway. I see it begin to flicker more intensely. My entire house vibrates. I hold my breath, my body shaking. It doesn't vanish this time. It's still there, standing just beyond the threshold like it's waiting for permission to enter. My throat goes dry. My head throbs. I can't tell how long I stand there, locked in place. The floor under my feet shudders. My eyes burn from not blinking. And that's where I am right now, feeling my pulse in my ears, my hands numb, my entire being focused on this outline that refuses to fade. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. All I can do is brace myself for whatever comes next. I stand here in the doorway, filled with dread, aware that this encounter might finally take a step into my home. It's not just a silhouette anymore. It's something that's taking form, something that might reach out and touch me. I wait, trembling, too afraid to speak but unable to run. And now, the only thing on my mind is that I might finally have to face this presence in a way I never have before. I still remember the first time I noticed something wrong with the guest room. I was standing in the hallway looking at the open door, and I saw the bedspread bunched up in a corner. I had just made that bed the night before. I had smoothed out every wrinkle because I wanted the place to look nice for future guests. Yet there it was, clearly disturbed, like someone had slept there. I felt a chill on my neck. It was a warm afternoon, but the back of my neck felt cold. I stepped inside and looked around, certain I was alone. I listened for any movement, any sign of an intruder. Nothing. The house was quiet, and the floorboards didn't creak. But I couldn't ignore the fact that the sheets had been pulled back. A pillow was on the floor and the bedside lamp was turned on. I walked over, turned it off, and placed the pillow back where it belonged. I had bought this house to use as a weekend retreat. It's a sturdy old place built with heavy wooden beams and thick walls. The land is spacious with a small yard and a few apple trees. When I decided to renovate and rent it out for extra money, I imagined busy weekends with guests enjoying the porch and the quiet surroundings. But then the guest room started showing these odd signs of activity. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had been distracted. Maybe I had left the lamp on by accident. Maybe I hadn't straightened the sheets as well as I thought. I got back to work that day, painting the living room walls. I spent hours bending down, climbing the ladder, and covering every patch of old paint until the walls looked fresh. By the time I finished, it was getting dark. I washed the brushes in my hands in the kitchen sink, noticing the dryness in my throat. My muscles were sore, and I wanted to take a shower and unwind. Before I went to my bedroom, I peeked into the guest room again. I had left the door open. The lamp was off, but the bedspread had changed position. It was now more than just bunched up. It looked almost folded at the foot of the bed. I stared at it, my heart thudding. I was sure that I hadn't touched the bed again after I first fixed it. I felt silly talking to myself, but I said aloud, "Who's here?" My voice sounded shaky. No reply. I took a step in. The air felt cooler than in the rest of the house. I could smell dust, and I noticed that the window was slightly open. Maybe a breeze had moved the bedspread. It didn't seem likely, but I couldn't find another explanation. That night I locked every door and window, checked them twice, and went to bed in my own room. I turned off the light and tried to focus on my breathing. I was tired, but my mind wouldn't shut down. I kept thinking about that bedspread and the lamp. Then I heard something. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone's footstep on the old wood floor in the hallway. Just a faint creak. I strained my ears, but the noise stopped. I told myself the house was settling. Old beams make noises at night. I stared at the ceiling, waiting to hear more, but everything stayed quiet. I was drifting off when I felt a slight dip in the mattress next to me. It was as if someone had just placed a knee on the bed. My eyes snapped open and I held my breath. I could feel the weight pressing down on the mattress. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, expecting to see a stranger or something else. There was no one, but I could still feel the indentation in the mattress. My heart pounded so hard that I felt dizzy. I touched the spot and the bed felt lower. like someone was there. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, turning in circles, trying to see. There was nothing. It felt like my senses were betraying me. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, I turned on its flashlight and shone it around. The room was empty. After a few seconds, the mattress rose back up as if whatever was there had left. My chest was tight, and I could feel sweat on my forehead even though the air felt cool. I managed to calm down enough to sit on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, and my mouth felt dry. I tried to think logically. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe my body twitched in a weird way. I grabbed a bottle of water from the floor near my bed and took a few sips. Then I forced myself to lie down again. I kept the light on. I didn't sleep well. I kept glancing at the spot next to me, expecting it to sink again. But the rest of the night passed without any more surprises. The next morning I woke up with a stiff neck and a headache. My eyes burned. I hadn't gotten enough rest, but I forced myself up, made some coffee and ate a quick breakfast. I had more renovation work to do and I wanted to stay busy. Every time I passed the guest room, I paused. The door was still open, and everything looked in order now. I didn't see any more changes in the bedding or the lamp. I told myself it must have been my imagination. But as the day went on, I kept feeling an urge to go back and check. By early afternoon, I was building new shelving in the living room. My power drill was whirring and sawdust covered the floor. That's when I heard a voice. It sounded muffled, like a conversation in another room. I turned off the drill and listened. The voice was coming from the direction of the hallway that led to the guest room. I wiped my sweaty forehead with my wrist and walked carefully toward the sound. I couldn't make out distinct words, but it sounded like 2 or 3 people talking quietly. A soft laugh broke through the murmur. I felt goosebumps. I picked up a hammer for protection, just in case. When I reached the guest room door, the voices stopped. I leaned in, ear close to the wood. Nothing. I opened the door and stepped inside. The bed was messed up again. This time, the sheets were pulled almost all the way to one side, and the pillows looked like they had been piled up against the headboard. The bedside lamp was on, and a sweater I didn't recognize lay crumpled near the foot of the bed. I stared at that sweater for a long moment. It was a dark green color, definitely not mine. I hadn't seen it before, and I had no clue how it got there. I picked up the sweater. It felt warm, as if someone had just taken it off. My heart started to pound again. My arms felt light and my scalp tingled. There was no sign of anyone in the house. I walked through every room, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" I checked the front door, the back door, and all the windows. Everything was locked from the inside. There was no car parked outside, no footprints in the yard. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I decided to do some research. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and started looking up the history of the house. I knew it had been built about 70 years ago. I found a few property records. They showed a series of owners and renovations. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I came across an old article online that mentioned strange occurrences in a house that matched the description of mine. It mentioned unexplained noises and objects moving by themselves. It didn't give any names or details, just a vague paragraph that sounded familiar to what I was experiencing. I felt uneasy reading it. My stomach twisted. I shut off my laptop and decided to take a drive into town to clear my head. I visited a local hardware store to pick up some extra supplies and struck up a conversation with the owner, a gray-haired man who seemed to know everyone in the area. I asked him if he knew anything about my house. He gave me a cautious look and said he'd heard rumors about odd things happening there. He mentioned that previous tenants complained about footsteps in empty rooms and voices coming from walls. He didn't have specifics, but he advised me to trust my gut if things felt too strange. That didn't make me feel better, but at least I knew I wasn't imagining everything. That night, I tried to relax. I made a simple dinner and watched some TV in the living room. The evening felt calm at first. Around 9, I turned off the TV and went to my room. I left the guest room door locked, just in case. I figured if something was inside, I'd hear if it tried to come out. But after brushing my teeth and getting into bed, I heard the faint click of a door in the hallway. My stomach dropped. I forced myself to go check. The guest room door was wide open again. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I flicked on the light and walked in. The bed was in total disarray. The lamp was on. A pair of socks that weren't mine sat on the floor next to the bed. They looked dirty, as if someone had worn them around the house. Then I heard a short burst of laughter behind me, close to my ear. I spun around, heart pounding. My breath caught in my throat. No one was there, but I could still feel that sensation of breath near my face. I rushed out of the room, slamming the door. My chest felt tight, and I leaned against the wall, trying to stay calm. The laughter had sounded real, not like a trick of the wind. I could still hear the echo in my mind. I went to my bedroom and locked the door, but I couldn't sleep. At some point during the night, I heard movement again, outside my door. It sounded like soft footsteps crossing the hallway. Then I heard more muffled voices, as if two people were talking about me. I heard my name once, I swear. It sounded muffled, but I recognized it. My face grew hot, and I felt sweat gathering under my arms. I stayed awake, gripping the sheets. Eventually, things quieted down, and I must have dozed off, but it was a restless sleep filled with the constant urge to check the hallway. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff back and a headache worse than before. The reality of the situation was getting to me. I felt drained, like my mind was being pulled in too many directions. I made coffee and forced down some toast, then called a local historian who specialized in the region's older properties. She told me that the house had several owners who mentioned unexplained occurrences, but none had offered proof. She said there were no records of violent events or anything that would explain a haunting. She suggested I keep a journal of everything that happened, noting the dates and times. I wrote down every detail I could remember from the last few days. My hand was trembling the entire time. I decided I had to figure this out. I went to the guest room in the middle of the day, armed with my phone's camera and a digital audio recorder I borrowed from a friend. I set the recorder on the nightstand, turned it on, and shut the door. I waited outside in the hallway for a few hours. I wanted to see if anything would happen when the room was left alone. Periodically, I heard the floor creak, even though the house was otherwise still. After about an hour, I heard a faint rustling sound, like someone tossing clothes on the bed. My heart pounded, but I stayed put. After 2 hours, I heard that soft laughter again, then the sound of the lamp switch clicking on. I almost dropped my phone because my hand was sweating so much. Finally, I entered the room. The lamp was indeed on, and this time there was a toothbrush on the nightstand, one I had never seen before. The bed was messed up again, with the covers pushed aside. The socks from the previous night were gone. I stopped the recorder and played it back right there. At first, I only heard low static and the occasional thump. Then I heard a quiet conversation. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like two people talking. It lasted for a few seconds, then went silent. My stomach flipped. I saved the recording, feeling more certain that something was inside this house. That evening, I went through the same motions. I had dinner, tried to distract myself with TV, then shut off everything and headed to bed. I left the hallway light on. Around midnight, I heard a voice say my name again. It was clear, and it sounded a few feet away from me. My heart hammered, and my throat tightened. I lay there in the dark, listening. Then the mattress sagged next to me, more than before. It felt like a person was lying down beside me. I could even feel a slight warmth against my arm. I was too terrified to move. My mouth went dry and my fingers curled around the sheets. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, until the pressure finally lifted. I'm still in the house. I feel watched all the time. I keep finding random belongings in the guest room. Gloves, a half-full cup of water, once even a wallet with no ID inside. It feels like whoever is staying there doesn't want to leave. Sometimes I hear faint music, like a radio playing in another room. Other times I hear conversation and laughter, but never any real words I can understand. The recordings I've made all show similar sounds, quiet dialogue, low static, and occasional laughter. When I checked the audio afterward, It makes my skin crawl because it confirms that I'm not just imagining things. I don't know who they are or why they're here. I've found no record of anyone actually living in this house before me who disappeared or died. There's nothing in the local archives about tragedies or anything that would explain these events. Yet the guest room is never really empty. The lamp keeps turning on by itself. The bed is always disturbed. The presence in my own bedroom persists, especially at night. I've considered selling the house, but I poured a lot of money into the renovations, and it's also my weekend getaway. I'm reluctant to abandon it, but each night here feels heavier than the last. I've talked to a couple of neighbors, and they say they're aware something odd has always gone on, but nobody can give me a clear story. Some just laugh it off. Others avoid the topic. I'm at a point where I'm not sure what else to do. I've been sleeping with the lights on. I keep a camera running in the hallway at night, but the footage so far just shows the guest room door opening on its own, then shutting again. One night I saw a faint outline move past the camera, but it was barely more than a vague shape. The next morning, the memory card had corrupted data in parts of the video. It keeps me on edge, wondering if the house itself is preventing me from seeing the truth. Every day I debate my next step. So far I haven't been hurt, but the tension is constant, and I'm always jumpy. I don't let anyone stay overnight here. I've canceled any plans to rent it out. When people ask why, I say the place isn't ready or it's under renovation. I can't imagine inviting someone else to experience this. I still hope to find an explanation, but as of now, the guest room remains occupied by something I can't see. When I walk by and hear that low conversation or that faint laugh, I wonder if it notices me too. And every night when I feel the bed sag, I know I'm not sleeping alone. I remember the day I carried the last box into that old building. The hallway smelled musty, like stale air trapped behind closed doors for decades. My breath felt heavy, but I ignored it. I just wanted to get my new apartment set up. The elevator rattled on the way up, and the walls inside were scratched and dented. I tried not to look at the graffiti or weird stains on the ceiling. I only wanted to reach my floor. I was excited to have a place at the top. It felt private and quiet. The day was clear, and the sun lit up the corridor when the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor. The rest of the building felt cramped, but my corridor had a huge window facing the city, letting in a beam of light. I walked toward my door, jingling my keys, already imagining my furniture and how I'd arrange everything. Inside my apartment, the air was thick and a little dusty, but I liked the wide living room and the view from the windows. I could see several rooftops below. Most of them had missing shingles or old water tanks. Across the street, there was another apartment building with half the lights turned off, even in the early evening. It felt like the whole neighborhood was stuck in another time. I tried not to think too hard about it. I set up my couch and small TV, then unpacked my kitchenware. I spent the night on an inflatable mattress because my bed wasn't delivered yet. Even then, I felt okay. Everything felt normal. The first odd sound happened about 2 weeks later. It was around midnight, and I'd just finished watching some show on my laptop. I was tired, but my brain was still wired from the glare of the screen. I closed the laptop and laid my head on the pillow. A few seconds later, I heard a soft thud coming from somewhere below my bedroom. At first, I thought maybe someone was moving furniture or dropping something. It was faint. I listened for a minute. Nothing else happened, so I shrugged it off and went to sleep. That next morning, I took the stairs down because the elevator was under maintenance. On my way, I noticed that the door to the floor below mine had caution tape across it and a chain lock. It looked official. I could see a faded sign that said something like "No entry by order of management." The metal chain was thick, and the padlock was rusted. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I figured the floor was undergoing repairs or something. I moved on and went to work. Over the next few nights, the thuds got louder. Sometimes I heard a dragging noise. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across the floor. At first, I tried to ignore it, but it kept going, usually after midnight, and it would last for 20 or 30 seconds before stopping again. I began to lose sleep. My eyes felt gritty in the mornings and I started dreading bedtime. I told myself it was just old pipes or the building settling. That's what I'd heard about older places. They creak and groan. One afternoon, I ran into the superintendent in the lobby. He was a short man with gray hair and a wrinkled face. I told him I'd been hearing noises coming from below. He frowned and shook his head. He said that floor was sealed off a long time ago because of structural problems. He told me no one lived there. He said the apartment right under mine had been locked for decades. I asked if it was possible that someone broke in, maybe squatters. He said he doubted it. He claimed the doors were reinforced and that any intrusion would be obvious. He promised he'd check, but he also told me not to worry. He said the building was old, and sometimes old buildings have weird noises. That explanation didn't calm my nerves. I hated going to bed now. Every night, I heard something. The volume changed. Some nights it sounded like faint voices. I couldn't make out words, but it resembled whispers or muffled talking. Other nights I heard scraping along the ceiling below me. At times it was just random creaks, but they were too focused in one spot to be normal building settling. I felt my chest tighten whenever it started. I'd lie in bed gripping the sheets, wondering what was going on down there. Part of me wanted to knock on the floor, but I was too scared to do it. One night I heard a sound that almost made me jump out of my skin. It sounded like a short burst of laughter, but it was shrill and distorted, like a recording played on an old device. Right after that, I heard an impact against the ceiling below. I sprang up, my heart pounding. I put my ear to the floor and held my breath. I heard low voices. It felt like 2 or 3 people were talking. Then I heard a short scream, abruptly cut off. Immediately after, there was a burst of that strange laughter again. I scrambled backward from the spot, breathing hard. I scanned my bedroom walls, half expecting them to start bleeding or something. I only saw chipped paint and a bit of dampness near the corner. Eventually, I sat there listening until the noises stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. I went to the superintendent the next day. I told him everything. He laughed it off. He claimed he went down there himself and found the doors locked, the corridor empty, and no sign of anyone breaking in. He said the main hallway was dusty and untouched. He suggested I might be under stress or hearing echoes. When I insisted, he told me he'd get someone else to check, but he didn't seem convinced. I left that conversation angry and uneasy. I felt alone with this problem. The next few days were quiet. I started to wonder if maybe I imagined it. I was tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But then, late on a Saturday evening, I heard something new. It started like a low rumble. My lamp on the bedside table rattled. At first, I thought there was an earthquake. I grabbed the side of the bed, but then it stopped abruptly. I placed my feet on the floor and felt a slight vibration. It lasted only a second or two. Then it was gone. I got up and went to the living room. I stood in the middle of the floor. Everything was silent. Then I noticed a small crack in one of the floorboards near the corner. It looked fresh. The edges were clean, and there was a thin line of dust around it. I kneeled down and ran my finger over it. It was about 3 or 4 inches long. It didn't seem too serious, but I was sure it hadn't been there before. My heart was pounding. I decided to call the superintendent in the morning. That night, I slept on the couch. I wanted to be closer to the front door in case something happened. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a slapping noise against the underside of the floor. It was like someone was smacking the ceiling below with an open palm. I felt the vibration through my back. I shot up and looked around. In the darkness, I could still hear it. 5 or 6 quick hits in a row. Then it stopped. My chest felt tight, and my breathing was shallow. I forced myself to stand. I walked to the spot where the crack was. I placed my ear against the floor. I heard nothing. I stayed like that for about a minute, trying to be brave, but my hands were shaking. I eventually went back to the couch, unable to sleep. In the morning, I noticed the crack had grown longer. It snaked outward from the original line and spread across a small section. I also saw a faint stain on the wall near the hallway. It was a dark spot, irregular in shape. I touched it. It felt damp, almost slimy. I jerked my hand back and wiped it on my jeans. I couldn't figure out what it was, maybe some kind of water leak, but it didn't smell like water damage. It had a sour odor, something unpleasant. I opened the window to let in fresh air. I called the superintendent and told him the floor was cracking and the walls were showing damp spots. He said he'd send someone up later in the week. I told him it was urgent, but he insisted they were backed up with maintenance requests. I argued, but he just repeated that I should wait. I was furious, but I had no other choice. That night was worse. I heard voices right after midnight. I pressed my ear to the floor. I heard a woman's voice and a man's voice. They were arguing. It was muffled, but the man sounded angry, the woman frightened. Then I heard a loud thud, followed by a single sharp cry. I jumped up, my pulse racing. I felt sweat on my forehead. I paced around the living room. Then came laughter. It was deep, harsh, like someone mocking me. I grabbed a broom and slammed the handle against the floor. The voices stopped. My apartment went silent. I held the broom, my hands shaking. After a minute, I lowered it. Then, from the spot where the crack was, I heard a single raspy exhale. It sounded like a person letting out a breath right against my floor. I gritted my teeth and backed away. I sat on my couch until dawn, every nerve in my body on edge. The next day, another stain appeared, this time near my bathroom door. I tried scrubbing it, but it just spread. It left behind a series of lines like faint etchings. They formed symbols I didn't recognize. They were curved shapes, crossed lines, and swirling loops. The edges were shaky, but they looked deliberate. My stomach churned as I looked at them. I felt something cold behind me, like a draft, except there was no open window. The hair on my arms stood up. I dropped my sponge and backed away, panting. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I tried to ignore the symbols, but every time I walked by, my eyes went straight to them. The next night, I heard more laughter coming from below. It had a mocking tone, almost playful. Then I heard scraping again. It sounded like metal dragging on concrete. My gut tightened. I felt trapped. The cracks in the floor got bigger. The small line turned into a branching network of splits across the living room. My footsteps caused tiny bits of debris to flake off. I was terrified that the floor might collapse. I imagined myself dropping through to the sealed apartment, but I didn't know what I'd find down there. My mind was filled with images of some figure waiting in the darkness. By the end of that week, my nerves were shot. I barely slept. I started keeping the lights on all night. I noticed more stains on the walls, forming more of those strange symbols. They seemed random, but they looked menacing. Sometimes I thought I saw them glow for a split second, like a faint flicker, but maybe that was just my imagination. I asked a friend to come over and see if he noticed anything weird, but he was busy. I didn't know anyone else in the building. I was on my own. One afternoon, I finally cornered the superintendent again. I told him I was leaving if something wasn't done immediately. He looked uneasy, like he knew more than he was letting on. He muttered something about how the lower floor had been shut for a very long time, and no one was allowed to go down there. He told me that even if I heard noises, it was impossible for anyone to be inside. I demanded to speak to whoever was in charge of building repairs. He said they'd come by in a couple of days. I didn't believe him, but I walked away, exhausted and sick of fighting. That night I tried to sleep in my bedroom again, but the scraping started just after midnight. It came from the exact spot under my bed. It was rhythmic. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. My chest got tight. I felt sweat building on my forehead. My arms felt heavy. I pulled the covers around me and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Then I heard a voice calling my name. It was a whisper, but the tone was rough. My heart pounded so loud I worried it would burst. I turned on the bedside lamp. The scraping stopped. I stayed still, listening. After a few minutes, I heard a sound like nails tapping on the underside of the floor. I thought I might lose my mind. At some point, I managed to doze off. I woke with a start around 4 a.m. to a loud crack. I jumped up and saw a fresh fissure in the bedroom floor, wide enough to see the subfloor. I swore out loud and backed against the wall. My ankles felt weak and I thought I might collapse. Then I heard a muffled giggle beneath me. It sounded unhinged. I ran out of the room and closed the door. I checked the living room and noticed the main crack there had widened. The edges of the wood were curled upward. I glanced at the walls and saw new symbols all over the place, bigger and bolder. Some looked like circles with crosses inside. Others were zigzags. My heart was racing. My lungs felt tight. I couldn't keep staying there. As the first light of morning came through the windows, I gathered the essentials: clothes, my laptop, and my phone charger. I stuffed them into a duffel bag. I decided I wasn't sleeping in that apartment another night. I didn't care if I had to pay for a motel. I just wanted to leave. Before I walked out, I heard a soft tapping from the living room floor, like an invitation. I chose to ignore it. I felt my stomach churn, and my throat felt dry. I opened my front door, locked it behind me, and headed to the elevator, my pulse still pounding. The hallway felt quiet, but the air was thick and stale. Downstairs, I told the superintendent I was done. I was leaving. He just looked at me without saying anything. I don't know if he believed everything I said, but he saw the look in my eyes. I left the building, duffel bag over my shoulder, knowing I couldn't stay there. As I walked away, I turned back once and saw my top floor window. I could almost feel something staring back at me from inside, waiting for me to return. I felt a chill run through me, even though the sun was out. I kept walking until I reached the bus stop. My hands were shaking. My head felt light. I didn't know what was inside that sealed apartment. I just knew it wanted to break through, and I wasn't about to wait around for it.